Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Gabby Doolin. Gabby Doolin was born on December 26, 2007, in Scottsville, Kentucky, to her father, Brian Doolin, and mother, Amy Doolin. Scottsville is a small farming community where many people know each other. The town does not have many options for entertainment, so school sports are a big part of the locals' lives, especially soccer. Schools host regular games and tournaments, and for the locals, participating in sports is a tradition. Gabby's family is no exception. She has two older brothers, and her parents encourage their children to participate in sports. When Gabby turned 7 in November 2015, her town prepared for the biggest football game of the year. Her school's football team would be playing against a team from another county. Gabby's older brother was on the football team, and she was on the cheerleading squad. The whole town was looking forward to the game. Gabby's family was going to the game, and Gabby convinced Brian and Amy to let her go with them. They initially planned to leave Gabby at home but eventually agreed to take her. When they got to the stadium, Gabby was excited to see her friends and asked her mom if she could hang out with them. Amy agreed but asked her to stay on campus and play with the other kids. During the entire time, Gabby kept running back and forth between her mom and her friends, playing and having a good time. Gabby also went to Brian in the announcer's room and asked for some money to buy snacks. After a while, Gabby's friends came up to Amy in the stands. Her mom took one look and noticed that Gabby wasn't among them. Gabby's friends asked her if she had seen Gabby and were worried. Amy said she hadn't seen Gabby in a while. She then asked why they were worried, and the girls explained that they had been playing hide and seek. Gabby had been assigned to look for them, and they had been hiding in the restroom. However, as time passed and Gabby had not arrived, the girls decided to leave the hideout to look for her. When they left the hideout, the girls could not find Gabby. They called her name and checked all the places they had played before, but Gabby seemed to have disappeared. The girls began to worry and thought that Gabby might have gone to the stands with her mother. After hearing the story, Amy began to panic and ran to her husband. Amy told Brian that Gabby was missing. Brian immediately began searching the area around the stadium. Meanwhile, Amy went to the snack bar where Gabby wanted to go and began looking for her there. After searching and finding no sign of Gabby outside the waiting areas around the stadium, Brian and Amy returned to the broadcast room and made an announcement over the loudspeaker in the hope that Gabby would hear them. This did not yield any results. Brian and Amy did not give up and continued to ask the people present to let them know if they knew where Gabby was. And several people joined them in the search for Gabby. They then continued to search the area around the stadium and asked the workers to light up the stadium areas with large lights. They also went deep into the surrounding areas of the baseball field, especially the small woods behind it. Despite their efforts, they still did not find her. It had been about a quarter of an hour since Gabby had gone missing, and Brian and Amy decided to call the police. The police arrived shortly after, heard what Gabby's parents and friends had to say, and immediately began an urgent search. While there had been previous missing persons cases, none had involved children. As such, they were rare in small towns, and the police were immediately faced with the worst-case scenario, especially when there were signs of crimes involving children, such as kidnappings and assaults. In that context, they were immediately faced with another difficult problem: the perpetrator could be at the stadium. This fact made the police alert and accelerated the investigation. The police realized that they did not have much time and that everyone would be going home soon. Therefore, they decided to stop the game and lock down the stadium, keeping everyone inside. The police closely guarded all exits to prevent anyone from sneaking out. To avoid disrupting the search efforts, the police did not inform people about what was happening. If people knew that the police were investigating the kidnapping of a 7-year-old girl that had occurred nearby, the situation could have become chaotic. Meanwhile, the state police arrived at the school and began searching the area. In a location in the woods, they stumbled upon a small creek and discovered the body of a young girl. They identified the victim as Gabby and called an ambulance to take the body to the medical examiner's office. After a preliminary examination, the police determined that the girl's cause of death was asphyxiation, as there were obvious marks on her neck. Furthermore, part of the girl's clothing was missing, leading the police to suspect that Gabby had been sexually assaulted. Amy saw an ambulance near the woods and thought that the police had found her daughter, so she rushed there but was stopped by the police. They did not want her to see the horrific scene. The police were investigating the murder and decided to move everyone from the stadium to the school gym. They suspected that the killer might be among them and needed to find a way to identify him. The detectives spoke to Brian and Amy, telling them about what might have happened to Gabby. The detectives also asked Brian and Amy if they had any suspicions about who might have committed this heinous act. They wanted to know if they had noticed anyone suspicious or if anyone had threatened their family. However, Brian and Amy insisted that they had no idea who might have done this. The detectives then spoke to Gabby's friends, asking them if they had seen anything strange. The detectives wanted to know if anyone had been following or watching them. But the girls said they could not recall anything of the sort. The police also took Gabby's friends to the gym and asked them to take a close look at the people present. They hoped that the girls might remember something. However, this did not lead to anything. The detectives believed that Gabby's friends might have seen the kidnapper but were too afraid to point him out or did not realize the significance of what they had seen due to their age. So the detectives asked them to recall every detail of that evening. Finally, one of them recalled that while she and Gabby were in the bathroom, she had seen a man standing near the door. The girl could barely remember what he looked like, except that he was wearing a denim jacket. The police questioned the ticket seller at the game, and he also remembered the man with the denim jacket. He said the man looked strange and drunk. However, the police were still unable to identify the man. The police continued to interview the people who attended the game, and gradually everyone learned why they were being held. When they realized that they might be in the same room as the killer, everyone was scared, especially for the safety of their children. But they still cooperated with the police and answered their questions. Investigators compared the list of names of all the men in the gym to the sex offender registry but found no matches. The police also visited the homes of several sex offenders who lived nearby, but all had solid alibis, and none of them were near the school at the time. Meanwhile, the police continued to interview people at the school and found some important clues. Some people told the police that during the game, they saw a man named Timothy Madden near the girls' restroom, acting suspiciously. He was a local, so many people knew him. Witnesses also said that he was wearing a denim jacket, a description that matched that given by one of Gabby's friends, who also saw a man near the restroom. Another witness was a distant relative of Timothy. He said that Timothy seemed unusual during the game. His youngest son was playing on the field, but Timothy was not paying attention. This was very strange because Timothy was usually very interested in his son's athletic achievements. He even seemed lost. Other witnesses also said that Timothy's behavior seemed strange, which prompted investigators to talk to him. By nightfall, almost everyone at the school had been released. The officers decided to go and question Timothy, but they had first consulted with the local police chief. The police chief had known Timothy since childhood and thought that Timothy was unlikely to commit his crimes, citing that Timothy's criminal record was mostly clean, except for minor traffic fines. The officers then went to Timothy's home, where he lived with his wife and 5 children. When they arrived, the officers knocked on the door and Timothy answered. They asked him if he knew why they were there. He replied that he knew about Gabby's murder but denied any involvement. In an attempt to elicit a response, the detectives asked if he had any explanation for a video recording showing him talking to the victim, Gabby, before she was killed. In fact, no such video existed. Timothy initially said he did not know what the officers were referring to. However, he quickly recanted his statement. He admitted that he had spoken to Gabby that evening near the stadium. He explained that he had stepped outside to smoke a cigarette when a group of girls ran past him. Moments later, Gabby walked by and asked if he had seen her friends while they were playing hide-and-seek and needed to be found. Timothy claimed to have directed her to the girls, and then she left. Detectives were skeptical of Timothy's rapidly changing story. His account indicated that he had been at the scene just minutes before the victim went missing, and there were no witnesses outside the stadium at the time, raising concerns that he may have had the opportunity to commit the crime. Detectives then asked for DNA samples and the clothes he was wearing at the stadium, which Timothy agreed to. However, when examining the clothing, police discovered what appeared to be blood stains on his pants, denim jacket, and underwear. When asked about the stains, Timothy claimed that they were just stains and that the police had made a mistake. Detectives were skeptical, but they needed to wait for the results of DNA analysis before making an arrest. Although the case was a priority for the lab, the analysis took several days to complete. The medical examiner completed an autopsy and confirmed that Gabby's cause of death was indeed strangulation. They then took a biological sample from Timothy, which was sent to the lab for analysis. Police received an unexpected lead in the form of an anonymous letter reporting a suspicious man at the game. The letter included specific details, such as the make and model of the person's car and the license plate number. This allowed investigators to quickly identify the owner of the car. The owner of the car, a student who lived about half an hour's drive from Scottsville, was quickly questioned by police. However, he denied attending the game and claimed not to have heard of the murder. He also provided an alibi, saying he was at work that evening. Police checked his alibi and found it credible, eliminating him as a suspect. However, the anonymous letter writer was never identified, leaving questions about the letter writer's motives. It is possible that someone was trying to frame the innocent student or play a prank on him. Police received another lead after several people reported suspicious behavior by a local 16-year-old boy. He initially claimed to have attended the game, but later denied having done so. He also mentioned witnessing girls playing hide-and-seek. Upon further investigation, detectives discovered that the boy was Timothy Madden's son. Furthermore, they discovered that just 2 weeks before the murder, the boy had gotten into a heated argument with his father, even holding a knife to his father's neck and threatening to kill him. When the police learned of this information, they went to the boy to investigate. However, they needed the boy's parents to be present to conduct the investigation. The boy's mother refused to provide a DNA sample, preventing the police from conducting further investigation. Rumors about this investigation spread quickly in Scottsville. People began to talk about the police investigating the Madden family in connection with Gabby's murder. Various theories were put forward, with some people thinking that one of Madden's older sons might be the culprit. Others suspected Madden himself or thought that he might be covering for his sons. Gabby's parents also heard about these rumors and were shocked. Gabby's father had known Timothy since 3rd grade and knew the family well. Their sons had played football together, and their daughters had cheered together. The two families were very close, even sitting next to each other at games. So Gabby's parents found it hard to believe that anyone in the Madden family could be involved in the murder. After rumors spread throughout the town, the Madden's eldest son, then 20, began exchanging information with local officers on social media using profanity and threats, asking them to keep their distance from his family. Due to the content of his threats, the police were forced to arrest him immediately and discovered that he had an outstanding warrant for his arrest in another town. Specifically, he was suspected of assaulting a teenage girl. After being brought in for questioning, he insisted that he was not the perpetrator of the murder and that he was simply upset about the accusations against his family. Importantly, he said he had been at his cousin's house in a nearby town on the night of the murder. He also agreed to provide a DNA sample to assist in the investigation. Gabby's funeral took place on November 20th, 6 days after the murder, and was attended by hundreds of people from Scottsville and the surrounding areas. They raised a significant amount of money to help Gabby's parents cover funeral expenses. Meanwhile, the DNA analysis of Timothy and his son had been completed at the lab, and the samples had been compared to the blood and semen samples collected. The results of the analysis showed that the DNA evidence was a perfect match. The semen found on Gabby's body belonged to Timothy Madden, and the blood on Timothy's clothing belonged to Gabby. As soon as this information was available, detectives notified Brian and Amy of the discovery of the killer. At the same time, the police also went to Timothy's house and arrested him. When Timothy was taken to the police station, he shouted to reporters that he was innocent. He later explained that the blood on his clothes was from scratching himself while passing through a fence. This contradicted his initial statement to the police that it was not blood but mud. With the DNA evidence matching, the investigators took the case to court, and the prosecution announced that they would seek the death penalty. During the preparation for trial, Timothy's lawyer asserted that his client was innocent and that the source of the evidence was questionable. The lawyer argued that Timothy was at the stadium at the time of the murder to film the game. However, Timothy himself told the police that he had seen Gabby at the same time. The attorney also pointed out that although Gabby's body was found in a creek, Timothy's clothes were dry when he returned to the stadium, raising questions about the accuracy of the evidence. Timothy's mother claimed that her son returned home in clean clothes, did not appear to be upset, and behaved as usual. However, the prosecution argued that the suspect's semen found on the victim's body disproved all of these arguments. The presence of semen could not be explained otherwise, and therefore Timothy's involvement in the case could not be denied. The police believe that Timothy's account of that evening contained some truth. He may have left the stadium during the game and encountered Gabby, who was looking for her friend. Since Gabby knew Timothy well, she may have approached him and asked for information about her friends. That may have been when Timothy came up with a plan, suggesting that the friends had run into the woods behind the baseball field and offering to escort Gabby there. When Gabby and Timothy were only a few hundred meters from the school, Timothy could have attacked Gabby and then returned to his friends. For years after the murder, in 2019, the parties began discussing a plea deal. The prosecution proposed to overturn the death penalty and exchange it for a life sentence on the condition that Timothy admitted his guilt. Brian and Amy agreed to this decision because the wait for trials was a heavy burden for them. They also worried that if the trial began, they would have to attend hearings for months, reliving the pain of their daughter's death all over again. Timothy eventually agreed and confessed. However, the agreement did not require him to reveal the details of what he had done. He only had to admit his guilt. This did not satisfy Gabby's family, who wanted Timothy to fully admit what he had done to their daughter. During Timothy's trial, the atmosphere became tense when Brian loudly yelled at Timothy. Eventually, the judge had to intervene, suspend the trial, and order the men to be separated. As a result, Timothy was sentenced to life in prison and served his sentence in a maximum security prison. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Victoria Nazirova. Olga Tsvyk, a 35-year-old Ukrainian immigrant eyelash artist, reported a robbery at her home. The incident occurred on September 2, 2016. Olga Tsvyk called the police after discovering that several valuables had been stolen from her bedroom. When the police arrived at the scene, Olga Tsvyk explained that she had gone to the hospital earlier due to severe dizziness and nausea. To investigate the circumstances surrounding the incident, the police conducted a detailed interview with Olga Tsvyk. During the interview, she recalled a recent unpleasant encounter with a client named Victoria Narova, who had come to her home to request urgent eyelash extensions. When Victoria came to Olga Tsvyk's home to request urgent eyelash extensions, Olga Tsvyk told Victoria that she only did eyelash extensions in the salon and did not take clients at home. However, explaining to Victoria was useless, and Olga Tsvyk had to agree to take her in. During the investigation, it was discovered that Victoria had come to Olga Tsvyk's apartment, bringing 3 slices of cheesecake from a famous local bakery. Victoria enjoyed 2 slices and insisted that Olga Tsvyk eat the 3rd slice. After drinking tea and eating the cheesecake, Olga Tsvyk began to feel unwell. After Victoria left, Olga Tsvyk suffered from severe nausea, eventually passing out for about 30 minutes. After regaining consciousness, Olga Tsvyk called an ambulance and was taken to the hospital by ambulance. However, medical tests found nothing unusual in her blood. When Olga Tsvyk returned home, she discovered that several valuables were missing and reported the theft to the police. The police found Olga Tsvyk listless and looking unwell. The police suspected that Olga Tsvyk was under the influence of drugs and had made up the story. Despite the police's suspicions, Olga Tsvyk maintained that she had not taken any medication, and Olga Tsvyk believed that the cheesecake she had eaten was the cause of her condition. Possibly poisoning. When searching the scene, police discovered a box of cookies from a local store in the trash, which Olga Tsvyk identified as the packaging for the cheesecake Victoria had brought. Police collected the remaining baking residue from the cheesecake, which was taken for in-room analysis to determine whether the cheesecake was the cause of Olga Tsvyk's health problems, but the forensic examination revealed nothing suspicious. Despite this, Olga Tsvyk insisted that the cheesecake was the cause of her condition. Olga Tsvyk mentioned that she had been to the hospital and that doctors had examined her body when she was admitted, and the police had contacted the medical facility to ask about Olga Tsvyk's condition and the test results. However, the doctors refused to provide information, citing patient confidentiality. The police considered this a reason not to believe Olga Tsvyk. The customer that Olga Tsvyk had told them about could not be found, so the case was adjourned. These details were told by a neighbor who the very next day noticed a suspicious woman at Olga's apartment. This woman came and went several times, hanging around the beauty master's apartment until she came face to face with her neighbor. The strange woman said that her friend Olga was sick and hurriedly left the house. The neighbor saw that the door to Olga's apartment was open and looked in to check on her. It was unbearably stuffy in the victim's apartment. The heating was on full blast despite the 30-degree summer heat. Olga was alive, but she was unconscious. She was lying on her bed, but she was wearing an unusual combination of clothes revealing underwear and warm sports pants. When the detectives heard about this, they had the feeling that someone was deliberately trying to change the victim's clothes. Scattered around Olga were pills containing a powerful drug. It looked as if Olga had taken the pills with the intention of taking her own life. A neighbor immediately notified 911, describing the strange woman as dark-haired, attractive-looking, and very similar to Olga. After learning new details, investigators became convinced that the doppelganger woman was not a figment of Olga's imagination. Then the detectives took up the case more actively. Everything they saw in the apartment seemed to be a description of a crime scene they wanted to frame as a voluntary demise. Detectives believed that the persistent cheesecake customer named Victoria Narova was involved. The police began searching for Victoria, but they had no leads, no information about who she was, or her photograph. Later, however, the department was approached by a private detective, a former police officer who had long been following the con artist's violent activities. He had already tracked Victoria online, where she advertised escort services on a dating site and through social media. The private investigator believed that the woman used online promotion to find victims for her crimes, and the scheme worked perfectly. Victoria would arrive at the home of the next client, then she would drug the person with psychoactive substances so that they would lose consciousness. After that, she would take everything of value and then go into hiding. This activity could have been concealed indefinitely if not for this tragic circumstance. Meanwhile, Alsvik finally recovered from the unpleasant events. Then, having discharged from the hospital, she shared on her page in social networks the story of poisoning. After that, one of her clients unexpectedly told that she knew a man named Ruben Barakov who was in a similar story. Ruben was the owner of a dry cleaner, and the man met Victoria Nazirova on a Russian dating site about a couple of months before Olga's cheesecake poisoning. The new acquaintance invited Ruben to her home and boasted that she was a very good cook. He agreed and came to her place, but as soon as he tasted the dishes, the man lost consciousness. The friend emptied his pockets, took expensive watches, money, and cards. The man was under the influence of a very strong psychoactive substance and sincerely believes that it almost killed him. Later, when he began to regain consciousness, Victoria took him to the dry cleaners, gave him to his colleagues, and told them that he was drunk and then left. From there, only then did Ruben realize that he had been robbed. The private investigator assumed the situation was much more serious, and the two victims of the poisoner were very lucky. In 2017, he worked with a client from Russia to help track down an elusive criminal. Nadia Ford turned to the private detective after the disappearance of her own mother, Alla Alexenko. The girl herself lived in New York, USA, but was born in Russia. Nadia was originally from Kotor. Her mother, Alla Enko, single-handedly brought up her daughter and son, and she had a hard time. She worked 5 jobs to provide for her children. Nadia dreamed of living in the USA since childhood, and her dream came true when the girl came to study in America in 2007. There, she met a guy whom she married and took his surname, Ford. But the marriage did not work out, and the spouse is divorced. Nadia stayed to live in the United States and successfully settled there. She maintained close relations with her mother, who at that time was left alone. Years later, Alla Alexenko went missing in Russia, and Nadia hired a private investigator to find her mother, Alla Alexenko, in 2017. In an effort to find her, Nadia hired a private investigator, who discovered that Victoria had rented a car on the day her mother went missing. The investigator looked into the car's information and found surveillance footage from October 5, 2014. The footage showed the car driving on the highway with 2 people inside, the driver, Victoria, and a motionless woman in the front passenger seat who looked like the missing 54-year-old Alla Alexenko. Nadia believed that the woman in the footage was her mother. Nadia went to the police, who verified that Victoria had indeed rented the car. As a result, the police summoned Victoria for questioning. During an interview with Victoria, she revealed that she had indeed driven the rental car involved on October 5, but said she was alone. Victoria agreed to take a lie detector test. Victoria was released pending the results, but later it turned out that Victoria failed a lie detector test and became the prime suspect in the case. Before the police could arrest her, Victoria took advantage of the opportunity, quickly fleeing the country on the first available flight. Meanwhile, the police expanded the search for the missing Alla Alexenko. Nadia actively participated in the investigation for 6 months, holding out hope that her mother was still alive. During the investigation, the police followed the route of the rented car, which led them to a forest near Victoria's hometown of Armavir. Upon reaching the forest, the police discovered a body about 3 hours away from Alla Alexenko's residence. The body was so badly burned that it was unrecognizable. Nadia identified her mother's body by her teeth. Despite a thorough investigation, the cause of Alla Alexenko's death has not been found. The police issued an arrest warrant for Victoria Nazirova and sent it to Interpol. However, Victoria escaped for a long time. Nadia returned to the United States after attending her mother's funeral in Kodar. For a long time, Nadia struggled to overcome the pain of losing her loved one. Finally, Nadia regained her health and vowed to her mother that she would pursue justice and hold the killer responsible for her mother's death accountable. One day, while surfing the internet, Nadia came across a post on social media. Victoria Nazirova, the prime suspect in her mother's death, was living a lavish life in Mexico, seemingly unconcerned about her wanted status. Nadia informed the U.S. police about Victoria's whereabouts and the police began an investigation. Nadia then hired a top U.S. private investigator to speed up the investigation. A wealthy friend of Nadia's paid for the detective services, as Nadia could not afford them. At the time, Nadia had been unemployed for months due to her search for her mother. The private investigator analyzed Victoria's social media photos, including recent posts by Victoria. The investigator discovered that Victoria was in the United States. In one selfie, the sunglasses reflected the dashboard of a car. After examining several models, the investigator identified the car as a Chrysler 300. Detectives successfully tracked recent photos of Victoria to the Russian neighborhood of Sheepshead Bay in Brooklyn. By checking a database of similar cars in the area, police were able to narrow down the search and identify the culprit. Despite the challenges, police located Victoria and discovered that she lived with her boyfriend in a complex where the Chrysler was registered in his name. Unaware that Interpol was searching for her worldwide, Victoria posted the photos online without hesitation. Detectives identified Victoria's boyfriend and contacted him. It turned out that the boyfriend had been poisoned by Victoria and was seeking help. Furthermore, Victoria had poisoned her boyfriend's beagle, causing the dog to die. On March 20, 2017, 41-year-old Victoria Nazirova was finally found and arrested. Nadia, the private investigator, and the police were able to breathe a sigh of relief. Leaving Victoria at large posed a significant threat as she had the potential to harm many more people. When searching Victoria's apartment, the police discovered Olga Tsbyk's identity card. Victoria's main motive for targeting Olga Tsbyk was not only her desire for money and valuables, but Victoria also wanted a passport. Victoria's temporary visa was about to expire and she needed a new ID card to stay in the country and avoid being tried in Russia. The face on Olga Tsbyk's passport bore a strong resemblance to Victoria's. The police suspected that Victoria intended to kill Olga Tsbyk and take her identity. Fortunately, Olga Tsbyk's neighbor intervened, saving her life. When they further examined the poisoned cheesecake in the laboratory, they discovered a banned sedative, which Victoria had added to the cake. The investigation revealed that Victoria had used this sedative to carry out her plot. Victoria would increase the dosage to make the victim unconscious. Olga Tsbyk was lucky to survive the incident. The unusually high temperature in her apartment was not accidental. Victoria deliberately increased the temperature to increase the effect of the sedative, which could have been fatal. Victoria clearly knew the situation in advance. To avoid suspicion, Victoria tried to cover her tracks by increasing the temperature in the house and dressing Olga Tsbyk in warm clothes. After her arrest, Victoria denied all charges, including her involvement in the disappearance and murder of Nadia's mother, as well as the intentional murder of Olga Tsbyk and the other victims. Police said Victoria was a suspect in the theft of 2 fur coats in May 2016, but the case was never solved. After several other incidents, it emerged that Victoria had been involved in the thefts, meeting men online, going to their homes, giving them drugs and stealing from them. Most of the men did not go to the police for fear of publicity, and Victoria escaped conviction. The trial was postponed for about 6 years due to the pandemic and the lengthy preparation of the case file. The case finally went to trial in January 2023, attracting media and public attention. Throughout the trial, Victoria remained silent. The court was forbidden from going into details about Alla Alexenko's death because the crime was committed in another country. Victoria's defense attorney said that there was no direct evidence or testimony linking Victoria to the crime, specifically the poisoning of the cheesecake and forcing Olga Tsbyk to eat it. According to Olga Tsbyk's testimony, Victoria brought 3 pieces of cheesecake to Olga Tsbyk's apartment, ate 2 in front of Olga Tsbyk, and then Olga Tsbyk ate the 3rd piece without hesitation. The prosecution argued that it was not an accident and that Victoria had deliberately added the drug to only 1 slice of the cake, knowing which one it was, and tricked Olga Tsbyk by eating the other 2 slices. After a thorough review of the case, the jury found Victoria Nazirova guilty of second-degree intentional homicide. Although the maximum sentence for this crime was 25 years in prison, the judge reduced the sentence to 21 years. However, by law, Victoria would be eligible for parole after 15 years in prison. Victoria Nazirova had been a sophisticated and stylish woman, but her life changed completely when she was sentenced to prison. The harsh realities of prison life took their toll on Victoria, with inadequate and poor nutrition. A fight in prison left Victoria severely injured, almost losing her sight. Victoria took the prison to court, filing a lawsuit against the prison for negligence on the part of the guards who failed to assist during the violent incident. The case was eventually settled out of court, with Victoria receiving $325,000 in damages. In an interview from prison, Victoria maintained her innocence, denying the charges related to the crimes she committed. Victoria will serve the remainder of her sentence in a U.S. prison before being deported to Russia, where she will stand trial for her alleged involvement in the murder of Alla Alexenko. Alla Alexenko's daughter Nadia has expressed relief that Victoria is facing justice for her actions and will no longer be able to escape punishment. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Isabella Rodriguez. Isabella Rodriguez was born in Colombia in 1975 and moved to Florida with her family in the 1990s. They obtained U.S. residency and eventually citizenship in 2002, when Isabella was 27. She married William Hellman, but they divorced in 2015 after a decade together. Isabella then met Louis Bennett online, and they began a romantic relationship. In 2016, Isabella and Louis had a daughter named Amelia. 6 months later, they purchased an apartment in Delray Beach, a city on Florida's Atlantic coast. They married the following month, in February 2017. At the time, Isabella worked as a real estate agent, and Louis owned a small solar panel company. On April 30, 2017, Isabella flew to the Caribbean island of St. Martin to meet Louis, leaving their 9-month-old daughter with relatives. They planned to spend a week on the water, returning home to Florida on Louis's sailing catamaran. After stopping in the British Virgin Islands and Puerto Rico, they arrived in Cuba, where they stayed for a few days. On May 14, the catamaran set sail from Varadero, Cuba, bound for Florida. Isabella called her sister 3 hours later to say she would be home the next day. At around 1 a.m., Louis sent out a distress signal to the U.S. Coast Guard, reporting that his ship had collided with an unknown object and was sinking. He also reported that his wife, Isabella, was missing. A Coast Guard helicopter crew located Lewis in a life raft around 4 a.m. and took him to Key West Island, the southernmost part of Florida. The catamaran was found floating upside down at dawn, but had not yet sunk. During an interview with investigators, Lewis explained that he and Isabella took turns keeping watch. At the time of the accident, it was Isabella's turn, and Lewis was asleep in his stateroom. He woke up to the sound of the collision and rushed on deck, but couldn't find Isabella. He called out her name, but she didn't respond. Lewis suspected that the loose mast might have knocked her overboard. Lewis also stated that the last time he saw Isabella, she was wearing a life jacket. When he was rescued, a Coast Guard rescue swimmer noticed that Lewis's backpack was unusually heavy. Upon inspection, officers found 225 collectible coins in the backpack, but their origin was unclear. Isabella Hellman went missing on May 15th, prompting a 4-day search and rescue operation by the Coast Guard. As no signs of her were found, the operation was officially ended on May 18th. The authorities were suspicious when Louis Bennett, Isabella's husband, requested a letter from the Coast Guard stating that his wife was presumed dead just 24 hours after the search had ended. The Coast Guard denied the request, as it was outside their jurisdiction to issue such a certificate. 6 days later, Lewis announced on TV that he was traveling to Cuba to rent a boat and continue the search for his wife on his own. However, just 3 days after making this statement, Lewis claimed to have already returned from Cuba and met with Isabella's sister, saying he had checked hospitals but found no signs of her. Lewis expressed his despair and resignation to the situation, stating he was struggling to accept that his wife might be gone. He described Isabella as his soul mate and someone he thought he would be with forever. The next day, Lewis and the police attempted to retrieve his daughter from his wife's family, but they refused to relinquish her. Lewis ultimately took custody of his daughter with the help of the police, despite the scandal surrounding him. During the dispute, Isabella's sister repeatedly accused Lewis of being responsible for Isabella's death. Lewis's calm behavior and actions after his wife's disappearance raised suspicions among both Isabella's family and the police. Investigations revealed that Isabella and Lewis had frequent arguments after the birth of their child. Family, friends, and neighbors all confirmed this. Isabella had confided in loved ones that Lewis wanted to move to Australia, but she was opposed to leaving the United States. On May 30th, Lewis gave an interview in which he denied any involvement in his wife's disappearance. He claimed they had plans for a happy life together, but now he was alone and their daughter would grow up without a mother. While investigating Isabella's disappearance, the police also looked into the origin of valuable coins found among Lewis's belongings. It was discovered that Lewis had previously worked as a first mate on a yacht. The captain of that yacht had a collection of 617 rare coins worth around $100,000, which was discovered a year earlier. While the yacht was unoccupied and docked in the Caribbean, thieves broke in and stole the coins on board. Although the perpetrator was not caught at the time, the yacht's captain later identified the coins found on Louis Bennett as part of the stolen loot, now that the FBI was investigating their origin. This new information led the FBI to obtain a search warrant for Lewis's apartment. Previously, 225 coins had been found among his belongings when he was rescued. On June 16, 2017, the search of his apartment uncovered an additional 162 gold coins hidden in a closet. Meanwhile, Lewis had relocated to England, where his parents lived, and had taken his daughter with him. However, due to financial difficulties, he returned to the United States and settled into an apartment valued at $125,000, while also receiving insurance payments for a lost catamaran. On August 28, 2017, Louis Bennett was arrested in Florida and charged with stealing coins. He pleaded not guilty. A few days later, a federal judge set his bail at $250,000, which Lewis was unable to pay. As a result, he remained in custody while awaiting trial. Additionally, Lewis attempted to have his wife declared dead. Lewis benefited from his wife Isabella's disappearance by gaining control of their shared property and bank accounts. However, the judge refused to declare Isabella dead twice, as the investigation into her disappearance was ongoing. In a separate case, Lewis pleaded guilty to stealing coins and transporting them to the United States in November 2017. Lewis's parents asked the judge to be lenient when sentencing him, citing the fact that his daughter had already lost her mother. In February 2018, Lewis received a sentence of 7 months in prison followed by 3 years of probation. On the same day, Lewis was charged with second-degree murder in Isabella's death. Authorities believed he intentionally caused the catamaran they were on to crash, which was allegedly a staged event to cover up the crime. The prosecutor's case was based on a claim that Lewis wanted to inherit Isabella's wealth to pay off his debts and take their young daughter to live in Australia. Isabella had expressed fear of her husband in text messages a few months before her death, stating that she felt he no longer respected her. She expressed fear about returning home. In a message sent months before her disappearance, Isabella wrote, "If you no longer like or love me, let's resolve this immediately. It's sad how you treated me the entire time." An inspection of the catamaran before it sank revealed that the portholes below the water line were left open. The damage to the dual hulls seemed to originate from within the vessel, near the water line. The water line is the point where the surface of the water meets the hull of a floating vessel. An expert hired by the FBI analyzed photos and videos taken by the U.S. Coast Guard of the catamaran before it sank. The expert concluded that Lewis's account of the events was not credible. The analysis suggested that the vessel did not sink due to accidental damage, but rather appeared to have been intentionally scuttled. A professor of nautical architecture and ocean engineering at the U.S. Coast Guard Academy testified in court that the Coast Guard found no evidence of a collision that could have caused the catamaran to sink. Divers inspecting the vessel were cautious due to the risk of collapse, and eventually, the catamaran sank to a depth of over 4,000 feet, preventing a detailed inspection. 2 years after Isabella Hellman's disappearance, a judge officially declared her dead. Palm Beach County Circuit Judge Scott Suskauer issued a series of orders stating that Isabella was presumed to have died on May 14, 2017. Despite the passage of time, Isabella's body has not been found, and she has not contacted her family. Based on the available evidence, it is presumed that Isabella is deceased. The statement said, "In January 2019, U.S. District Judge Federico Moreno suspended Lewis's February sentencing hearing in Miami and rescheduled it for May 28, saying he would not act until Isabella's family could personally visit her daughter Amelia, who turned 3 in July. In November 2019, Lewis pleaded guilty to manslaughter, and the second-degree murder charge against him was dropped. Before the plea deal, he faced a possible life sentence for second-degree murder, but the new charges limited his maximum sentence to 8 years in prison. According to a document filed with the court, Lewis claimed he didn't remember what he was doing when he discovered his wife was missing. He didn't search for her on the catamaran or in the water, nor did he use flares to signal for help. Instead, Lewis packed his belongings onto a life raft and then intentionally damaged the catamaran to make it flood, allowing him to escape on the raft. Prosecutors stated that Lewis waited 45 minutes after realizing his wife was missing to call for help. Notably, the U.S. Attorney's Office pointed out that Lewis was an experienced sailor with training in emergency procedures, having previously sailed from St. Martin to Australia. Don't understand why he failed to use his knowledge to respond to the emergency situation. Prosecutor states that Lewis admitted to being negligent in handing over control of the catamaran to his inexperienced wife, Isabella, resulting in her falling overboard and drowning. Despite being an experienced sailor with a Royal Yachting Association certification, Lewis failed to ensure Isabella wore proper safety gear. In contrast, Isabella had no formal sailing training or experience, and Lewis knew it. Lewis received training in emergency procedures, including man-overboard protocols and night sailing safety, but Isabella did not. The prosecutor notes that only Lewis knows the full story of what happened on the catamaran that night. Following Lewis' guilty plea, Isabella's family, through their lawyer, expressed their immense pain and asked Lewis to show remorse. They stated that while Lewis can never undo the harm caused by taking Isabella away, he continues to cause additional pain by depriving them of contact with his and Isabella's daughter, Amelia. Isabella Hellman's family is grieving and missing her dearly. Although they have had limited contact with her daughter Amelia through 3 FaceTime calls, they have not been able to see or hug her in a long time. They long to be reunited with Amelia and provide her with love and care. As a part of their family, they want to be with her. They urged Lewis Bennett to do the right thing. Lewis Bennett, Isabella's husband, was sentenced to 8 years in prison on May 28, 2019, after pleading guilty to manslaughter in connection with her death. During his sentencing hearing, Bennett apologized sincerely to Isabella's family for putting them through immense pain. He acknowledged that his actions led to a devastating tragedy, for which he is truly remorseful. Lewis admitted to making poor decisions that worsened the situation. He expressed regret in federal court in Miami, where he waived his right to appeal as part of his plea bargain. Before the judge delivered the sentence, Lewis requested the opportunity to be released from prison early so that he could continue to care for their daughter, Amelia. Lewis expressed a desire to care for his daughter, saying, "I want to raise her in a way that honors my late wife's wishes." However, the judge ruled against him, sentencing him to 8 years in prison followed by 3 years of supervised release. As a result, Amelia will remain with her paternal grandparents in England for the time being. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Luke Jobson. Luke Jobson, a 22-year-old who was on the verge of qualifying as an electrical and mechanical engineer after completing 4 years of study and an apprenticeship. He was a well-liked and talented individual who was known for his athletic abilities, particularly in football. Growing up, Luke attended St. Patrick's Comprehensive and Hawood Primary Schools in Thornaby. He was a talented sportsman, playing football as a center forward for Thornaby Central in his youth. His love of clothes and fashion was evident, and he took great pride in his appearance. According to his dad, Stuart, Luke was a perfectionist who would often check his family members' clothes to ensure they looked their best. Stuart described Luke as a genuine and beautiful person, both inside and out. Luke, a young man from Yarm, attended a nightclub called The Keys on Saturday, January 26, 2019, along with his friends. Yarm is a small town, and The Keys is a popular spot on the high street, where the town's nightlife is concentrated. Luke failed to return home after his night out at The Keys, and his parents tried to contact him on Sunday morning, but he didn't respond. His friends were also unaware of his whereabouts. Luke's family quickly took to Facebook to appeal for help, and many people joined the search for him. The police investigation began on Sunday, and Cleveland police released a statement expressing concern for Luke's disappearance, as it was out of character for him. They asked the public to share any private CCTV or dash cam footage that might be relevant to the case. Police had learned about a possible altercation involving Luke shortly before his disappearance. According to reports on social media, Luke got into a fight with several people outside The Keys around 2 a.m. The last reported sighting of Luke was near Yarm School at around 2:15 a.m. The police were investigating this information, but their top priority was finding the missing young man. Luke's girlfriend, Danny, made a heartfelt plea on social media, describing her experience as a living nightmare and urging anyone with information to come forward. Luke's cousin, Jake, also reached out on Facebook, asking for help in locating Luke. He was last seen fleeing from a group of young men on Yarm High Street. Friends and family initiated a search for Luke near the River Tees in Yarm on Sunday, which eventually grew into a large-scale operation. By Monday morning, hundreds of concerned individuals gathered at Yarm School's car park, eager to contribute to the search. Despite many not knowing Luke personally, the overwhelming response to the Facebook appeal showcased the community's spirit. Cars arrived at the car park, carrying people who were ready to aid in the search. Many others arrived on foot, dressed in warm clothing, prepared to brave the cold weather. Over 300 people participated in the search, which was divided into 18 groups that scoured various areas, including Preston Park, Stokesley, Cottonwood, Early Nook, and Hilton. Specialist police search teams also combed the River Tees banks near Yarm School. A body found in a River Tees has been identified as 22-year-old Luke Jobson, who had been missing. Cleveland police confirmed the news and expressed their condolences to Luke's family and friends. Family members are being supported by specially trained officers during this difficult time. In a tribute, Luke's parents, Lisa Jobson and Stuart Banks, described their son as a popular and ambitious young man who loved working out at the gym. Luke's mother, Lisa, said they are proud of everything he achieved and want to celebrate his life. She added that they want everyone to remember him for the good things he did. The news of Luke's death sparked an outpouring of emotion in the Teesside community. Friends and family members flooded social media with tributes, and a huge crowd gathered in Yarm for a vigil in his memory. Almost 1,000 people attended the event, which included a firework display and a rendition of Angels by Robbie Williams. The community showed their support for Luke's family by leaving ribbons, balloons, and flowers near the scene of his death. As the police investigated Luke's death, they spoke to numerous individuals, including those who were at the nightclub on the night of the incident. They also obtained CCTV footage, which corroborated earlier reports of a confrontation between Luke and several others. The footage shows Luke wearing a gray t-shirt, jeans, and white sneakers. It appears that Luke made a comment to someone, which caused several aggressive-looking individuals to approach him. The situation quickly escalated, and Luke can be seen running away from the group as they chase after him. News of a confrontation being linked to Luke's death emerged soon after he disappeared, as speculation about what had happened spread on social media. Initially, the police only confirmed reports of an altercation prior to his disappearance. They arrested 6 teenagers, aged from 16 to 18, on suspicion of involvement in Luke's death, but later released all of them. The investigation continued, and a new development in the case occurred the following January. Cleveland police announced that 5 people, aged 17 to 20, had been charged with a fray, which involves using or threatening unlawful violence, but not with Luke's death. They were set to appear in court. The 5 individuals charged include a 17-year-old, now 18, who cannot be named due to age restrictions, Edwin Taha, 20, Ryan Alp, 19, Ali Abdul Majid, 19, and Hamad Asif, 18. According to reports, Edwin Taha was the alleged leader of the group. In England and Wales, a person can be charged with a fray if they use or threaten violence towards another person in a way that would cause a reasonable person to fear for their safety. To understand the events leading up to Luke Jobson's death, we need to consider the following points. Firstly, when 2 or more people use or threaten violence, their actions are considered collectively. Secondly, for a threat to be valid in this context, it cannot be purely verbal. Looking at the recording, it's clear that Luke was concerned for his safety as he was seen running away. The threats against him were not just verbal. Unfortunately, the exact cause of the conflict remains unclear, as none of the suspects provided a clear answer. Additionally, the whereabouts of Luke's friends, who were with him at the nightclub, are unknown at the time of the quarrel. The police recording does not provide this information. From the footage, it appears that Luke was not planning to leave the club, as he was standing outside in just a t-shirt, with his jacket still inside. The footage shows Luke confronting a group before being forced to run for his safety. Initially, his athletic ability allowed him to overcome his suitors. However, the group, including Taha and other future defendants, returned to the nightclub, got into a car, and caught up with Luke near a school. They sprayed Luke's face with an unknown substance, suspected to be pepper spray, causing him to lose his sight. In an attempt to escape, Luke climbed over a wall into the school grounds, where CCTV cameras captured his entry into a boathouse. Sadly, this was the last time Luke was seen alive. After Taha pepper sprayed Luke's face, the group got back into their car and drove away. It's unclear whether Luke knew where he was going, but given that he didn't attend school there and was disoriented from the tear gas, it's unlikely he understood his surroundings. If this was the case, it's possible he accidentally fell into the water once he entered the boathouse. It's worth noting that these events took place in January, when the water in the river was extremely cold. According to the police, no one else entered the boathouse that night, and Luke never came out. 2 days later, the police found his body in the water near the school, and the cause of death was determined to be drowning. The suspects initially refused to admit guilt, but during the first court hearing on September 28, 2020, Edwin Taha and Ali Abdul changed their minds and admitted to their involvement in the fight. Autopsy results from pathologists Dr. Nigel Cooper and Dr. Jennifer Bolton revealed that Luke had consumed alcohol before his death. The amount he drank was likely to cause noticeable signs of intoxication in an average person. The police had released Edwin Taha on bail, and none of the suspects were detained before the trial. The investigation found that the victim had traces of a banned substance in his system, which, combined with alcohol, made him more vulnerable to hypothermia. There were no injuries or evidence of assault, and the deceased did not have any underlying medical conditions that contributed to his death. While the autopsy did not show any signs of eye inflammation or evidence of being sprayed with a substance, witness statements confirmed that the deceased, Luke, was pepper sprayed and struggled to walk and see. The perpetrator, Taha, later bragged about the incident on the high street. The coroner concluded that Luke was incapacitated by the pepper spray. The verdict was announced in October 2020. In an emotional statement, Luke's mother, Lisa Jobson, addressed the court as the individuals responsible for her son's death faced justice. Miss Jobson described the gang that had surrounded her son, Luke, before chasing him through Yarm High Street as a pack of wolves. She explained that from the day Luke was born, he had been loved, cared for, and protected. He had been their world and their only son. They had been extremely close to him, and he had been a kind, gentle, and genuine person who had touched the hearts of everyone he had met. Luke had been a loving and caring individual who had lit up a room with his presence. He had had good friends from diverse backgrounds and cultures, and he hadn't had a mean bone in his body. He had been a positive person who always strived to be his best and had always been looking forward to new experiences. Miss Jobson expressed that they would never forget the terror Luke had faced that night, and the fact that none of the gang members had had the courage to take responsibility for their actions was unbearable. Knowing that their faces had been the last ones Luke had seen on this earth was a constant reminder of the pain and suffering he had endured. It was a living hell for them, and they were left to live with the knowledge that their son hadn't been able to escape safely. At the trial, the lawyer for Abdul's co-defendant stated that Abdul was unaware that Taha possessed pepper spray. He claimed that Abdul did not expect the victim to be assaulted with a weapon. Only one person, not Abdul, knew that Taha had a pepper spray. Taha's lawyer revealed that his client had a difficult childhood, which had led to poor decision-making. On the night of the incident, something was said that triggered a chain of events. Taha acknowledges that the outcome should never have happened. Taha's lawyer also shared that his client had moved to the UK from France at age 4 and had been left to live with a foster family after his mother returned to France. The judge emphasized that neither defendant was directly responsible for the victim's death, but noted that the chase had led to the victim entering the school and boathouse, ultimately resulting in drowning. Taha, 20, was sentenced to 21 months in prison after pleading guilty to a fracas. He also received an additional 4 years and 4 months for charges related to prohibited substances. 19-year-old Abdul, of Corvus Drive in Stockton, has been sentenced to 15 months in prison, suspended for 18 months, after admitting his involvement in an incident that led to the death of Luke. Abdul was also ordered to complete 300 hours of unpaid work. According to the court, Abdul was driving the car that pursued Luke on the night of the incident. The court heard that the altercation started on Yarm High Street, where Luke was chased by a group of males in a vehicle. When they caught up with him, he was sprayed in the eyes with a noxious substance, which had a severe effect on him. Detective Chief Inspector Sarah Robinson stated that the altercation had a devastating impact on Luke's family, who have been left without their son and brother. She added that the incident has caused immense pain and hardship for the family, and that nothing can bring Luke back. However, now that the case has concluded, the family may find some closure and be able to move forward with their lives. Charges against 2 other individuals, 19-year-old Ryan Alp and 18-year-old Hamad Asif, were dropped. To summarize the case, Chris Atkinson of the Crown Prosecution Service made a statement after the sentencing in October 2020. He stated that although Taha and Abdul were found guilty, the focus remains on Luke Jobson's family, who may find this time particularly challenging. The prosecution successfully proved that both men were involved in an altercation with Luke before his death. However, it is essential to note that there is no evidence to suggest that their actions directly caused the tragic events that followed the attack. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Celeste Mano. Celeste Mano was born on November 30, 1997, in Melbourne, Victoria, Australia. She was the youngest of 2 children to parents Eggy Diro and Tony Mano, and grew up with her older brother Alessandro. Although her parents separated when she was young, her father remained involved in her life, providing financial support and maintaining a relationship with his children. Celeste was a sociable and active student who enjoyed sports, dance. Initially, she wanted to become a lawyer and enrolled at the University of Melbourne to study criminal and civil law. However, she later lost interest in law and switched to studying advertising and marketing. In 2018, she landed a job at a rapidly growing e-commerce company. She rapidly advanced in her career, rising from a call center worker to the head of a department in just a few years. She was considered one of the company's most promising employees. Celeste has always been the center of attention, especially among men. However, she is very picky about her partners. Meanwhile, one of her colleagues, Louis Seiko, has had his eye on her since she started working at the company. He is almost 16 years older than her and has shown no signs of career ambition, remaining in the same subordinate position for many years. Despite his reserved nature, Louis Seiko was friendly and polite. He often asked Celeste out, but she consistently declined. Instead of taking the hint, Louis Seiko chose to view her rejections as a challenge or a game. He believed that Celeste was playing hard to get and was determined to win her over. Despite her clear lack of interest, Louis Seiko continued to try and draw her attention through various means. Celeste finds Louis Seiko's attention annoying, but she tries to keep her cool, hoping that he will eventually lose interest or focus on someone else. However, Louis Seiko's infatuation with Celeste grows stronger over time, becoming an obsession that everyone around him notices. Celeste confided in a close friend and colleague that she would never consider a romantic relationship with Louis Seiko due to several reasons. Firstly, she found him odd and unpredictable. Secondly, she was not attracted to men lacking ambition and life goals. Lastly, their significant age difference was also a factor. Despite feeling pity for Louis Seiko, she knew he had no chance with her. Louis Seiko's relentless pursuit of Celeste led to a critical mistake: he neglected his work duties. As a result, his productivity plummeted, which did not go unnoticed by senior management. Louis Seiko received 3 reprimands and warnings before being dismissed in early autumn 2019. As he gathered his belongings in the office, he appeared on the verge of tears, clearly devastated by the outcome. Celeste is relieved when Louis Seiko finally leaves her alone, but she also feels guilty, thinking that her actions contributed to his firing. Manel, as a department manager, thanked Louis Seiko for his years of service and escorted Louis Seiko out of the building. As they parted, he patted Louis Seiko on the back and sincerely wished him luck. The dismissed employee, Louis Seiko, came to a surprising realization. He thought Celeste was hesitant to pursue an office romance because she was his superior, and it might harm her career. Now, Louis Seiko believed that there were no obstacles to their happiness, and they could be together. Overcome with emotion, Louis Seiko suddenly kissed Celeste on the cheek. Shocked by his bold move, Celeste was speechless. She quickly turned around and fled back into the office without saying a word. Louis Seiko misinterpreted her reaction, thinking that Celeste had feelings for him and that he shouldn't give up on pursuing her. After being fired, Louis Seiko created a social media account and sent Celeste a friend request, which she initially accepted. However, when he began asking her to meet up and go out, she politely declined and eventually blocked him. Undeterred, Louis Seiko created a new profile and sent her another friend request the next day. Celeste tried to ignore him, but he continued to comment on her photos, complimenting her appearance and suggesting they would make a great couple. To limit Louis Seiko contact, Celeste adjusted her profile settings to restrict messages, comments, and posts to only her friends. Despite this, a week later, she started receiving romantic messages from an unknown number, which she suspected were from Louis Seiko. The messages included poems he had written, admiring her beauty and trying to persuade her to go out with him. This was particularly concerning since Louis Seiko had never had her personal phone number during their time working together, and she had only communicated with him through work channels. Celeste initially tried to address the stalker by answering one of his calls. Celeste explained to him that there was no possibility of a relationship and urged him to stop contacting her. Unfortunately, Louis Seiko was not receptive to her message and instead continued to focus on how much he enjoyed hearing her voice. Despite Celeste's attempts to block him, Louis Seiko managed to circumvent this by calling from different numbers each time. Feeling harassed, Celeste eventually changed her phone number, but to her surprise, Louis Seiko was able to obtain her new number within a week. Celeste had been trying to protect herself from Louis Seiko, a crazed fan, for about 6 months. Despite blocking Louis Seiko's phone number and fake social media accounts, and ignoring his messages, the harassment continued. The messages escalated from romantic to bold and threatening, followed by demands to meet Celeste. Celeste had no idea that Louis Seiko had begun following her from work to her home, knowing her address. At first, she caught glimpses of Louis Seiko near her home, but Celeste assumed it was because she was too nervous. However, when she realized that Louis Seiko was actually following her, she knew she needed help. Celeste decided to seek police protection, hoping to obtain a restraining order that would prohibit the stalker from approaching her or her home. The police officers were unresponsive to Celeste's concerns, seeming to mock her request for help. They claimed that Louis Seiko had not done anything illegal, as writing explicit poems or fantasies in text messages is not against the law. Without evidence of Louis Seiko following or lurking near her home, Celeste was told to leave the police station. Celeste continued to be harassed by Louis Seiko on a regular basis. During the day, she would see his car parked across the street from her office, and at night, he would drive past her house several times. This constant presence made her feel uneasy. In August 2020, Celeste returned to the police station, this time providing photo and video evidence on her phone that showed Louis Seiko was indeed stalking her. A different officer took her statement and was more serious about the situation, expressing surprise at his colleague's previous indifference. He advised Celeste to go to court immediately, where a restraining order was issued against Louis Seiko, prohibiting him from contacting or approaching her in any way. Louis Seiko's sudden disappearance brought Celeste a sense of relief and freedom. However, that feeling did not last long. Less than a month later, she began receiving text messages from unknown numbers. The messages were from Louis Seiko, who initially begged her to retract his statement and drop the restraining order, arguing that it was interfering with their romantic relationship. Over time, his tone shifted from pleading to demanding. Celeste immediately reported the messages to the police, as Louis Seiko's actions were a clear violation of the restraining order. As a result, he was fined and warned that further violations would lead to severe consequences, including the possibility of jail time if he continued to harass her. After this incident, Louis Seiko remained silent for almost 2 months, leading Celeste to believe that he had finally left her alone. Celeste met Chris Reedsdale in September 2020, and they quickly discovered they shared many common interests. Life views and goals, which led to a romantic relationship. She confides in Chris about her harassment by Louis Seiko, who has been silent for over a month but still worries her. Chris made a conscious effort to make Celeste feel safe and supported, showering her with care and attention. A month later, in early November, Celeste decided it was time to introduce Chris to her family over dinner. Her family welcomed Chris warmly. The next few weeks passed peacefully, and Louis Seiko made no further attempts to contact Celeste. She was happy, spending all her free time with Chris, and it seemed that she had finally forgotten about worrying about Louis Seiko. On November 15, 2020, they went on a date to a cafe where they sat together, enjoying each other's company. Celeste offered to take a selfie to capture the moment. Celeste loved the photo so much that she decided to use it as her profile picture on social media. By doing so, she also wanted to share the news of her new relationship and make it clear that things were getting serious. Chris also posted the photo on his page, along with a heartfelt caption expressing his love for Celeste. Sadly, this date turned out to be their last. After dropping Celeste off at home, Chris said goodbye, planning to see her again the next day. Celeste spent about an hour in the kitchen with her mother Eggy, before going to bed early to get ready for work the next morning. On November 16, 2020, Eggy was suddenly awakened around 4 a.m. by the sound of breaking glass. At first, she thought the noise was coming from outside, but then she heard more suspicious sounds, including banging, screams, and commotion, which seemed to be coming from within her house. Eggy quickly got out of bed, put on her robe, and rushed to her daughter Celeste's room. As she opened the door, she saw someone jumping away from Celeste's bed and escaping through a broken window. When Eggy turned on the light, she was shocked to see her daughter lying in a pool of blood, covered in cuts and small shards of glass. Celeste was struggling to breathe, her eyes wide open and looking up. Eggy immediately called an ambulance and tried to stem the bleeding from her daughter's deep wounds while she waited for help to arrive. Tragically, despite their best efforts, Celeste passed away before police and paramedics arrived. The medical examiners found over 20 stab wounds on the victim's body, with the fatal blow being a wound to her heart. After investigating the scene and comparing it to Eggy's testimony, the police concluded that the attacker broke into the Celeste's room through the window and carried out the attack in under 3 minutes, before the Celeste's mother entered the room. The attacker used a large butcher's knife, striking randomly, and the Celeste tried to defend herself, as evidenced by the numerous cuts on her arms. When asked if the Celeste had any enemies, Eggy mentioned Louis Seiko, who had been harassing the victim with calls and threatening messages for over a year. This information was confirmed by other family members. friends, and colleagues. The suspect left behind a large number of bloody fingerprints at the scene, as well as DNA on a fence he jumped over while fleeing, which was likely due to an injury to his hand. As a result, it was crucial to detain and interrogate Louis Seiko immediately, as he was the prime suspect in the case, and to verify and compare all the evidence and witness statements. Louis Seiko was immediately taken into custody but initially claimed to be innocent, professing his love for Celeste and insisting he could never hurt her. However, forensic analysis quickly proved him wrong. His bloody fingerprints were found both in Celeste's room and on the fence surrounding her property, tying him to the crime scene. Investigation revealed a prior restraining order, which prohibited Louis Seiko from approaching Celeste. Notably, the night before the crime, he bought a hammer and large knife at a local hardware store. The store's security cameras caught him purchasing the tools at checkout. It later emerged that he used these tools to carry out the violent crime, smashing through a window to enter Celeste's house and fatally stabbing her with the knife. The case against Louis Seiko was overwhelming, with evidence showing he had been watching his victim for a long time and knew everything about her. The final straw was when she posted a photo of her new boyfriend on social media. After that, Louis Seiko bought a knife and hammer and snuck into the victim's home at night to harm her. His actions seemed deliberate and planned. Louis Seiko's personal life was marked by instability. At 39, he had never married, still lived with his parents, had few friends, and had trouble holding down a job. He also had a family history of mental health issues, with a brother serving a long prison sentence for a serious crime. Louis Seiko's lawyer arguing that he needed specialized treatment rather than imprisonment. However, this claim outraged the victim's family, who feared that Louis Seiko would escape punishment. The psychiatric experts ultimately concluded that while Louis Seiko did have mental health issues, he was fully aware of his actions when he committed the crime. He had planned the details in advance, which meant he would have to stand trial. The murder trial is set for the fall of 2023, 3 years after Celeste's tragic death. In the years leading up to the trial, Louis Seiko attempted to argue that he was mentally ill and not responsible for his actions. He spent much of that time in a psychiatric ward. During the trial, Louis Seiko remained calm and detached, seemingly uninterested in the proceedings. He admitted to his guilt but claimed that his intention was not to take Celeste's life, but rather to win her love. However, the jury unanimously found him guilty on all counts. As a result, he was sentenced to 36 years in prison, with the possibility of parole only after serving 30 years. The Celeste's parents drew attention to the fact that their daughter had reported the perpetrator to the police as early as 2020, seeking protection from him. However, her complaint was not accepted due to a loophole in the existing legislation. This led to calls for a change in the law, which would later be referred to as Celeste's Law. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Michelle Young. Jason Young was born in 1974 in Brevard, North Carolina. Jason grew up in a typical family. After completing high school, he attended the prestigious State University in Raleigh, the state capital. Following graduation, he secured a job as a salesman at a large retail chain. Jason proved to be a valuable and reliable employee, but his friends described him as inconsistent and unpredictable in his relationships with women. He had a reputation for being a womanizer, often changing partners. Michelle Young was born in February 1977 in New York. She was raised in a close-knit family with her younger sister Meredith and their devoted mother Linda. Linda played a significant role in Michelle's early life, nurturing her passions and talents from a young age. Michelle's interests in law and economics were evident from her school days, and she dreamed of pursuing a career in this field. Michelle's academic journey led her to apply to several universities after high school. eventually gaining acceptance into a top university in North Carolina. There, she pursued her master's degree in economics. After completing her education, Michelle secured a prestigious job at a leading accounting firm in the state, rapidly establishing herself as a skilled professional. She achieved financial stability, was able to support herself fully. A chance encounter at a bar on Michelle's birthday, when Jason accidentally spilled a cocktail on her, he immediately apologized and offered to buy her another. This kind and thoughtful act caught Michelle's attention, and they began chatting. As they talked, they discovered that they had a lot in common. They both went to the same college, although Jason graduated 3 years earlier. Their casual conversation quickly turned into a romantic relationship, and they began dating. Although they had deep feelings for each other, they had no plans to get married or move in together. At the time, Jason still lived with his parents in Brevard, while Michelle lived in Raleigh. They would see each other on weekends or during Jason's business trips to Raleigh. During one of their meetings, Michelle dropped a bombshell: she was pregnant. This news came as a shock to both of them, as they were not yet ready to become parents. Jason and Michelle were young and focused on their careers, with no immediate plans to start a family. However, when Michelle became pregnant, she decided to keep the baby after some initial hesitation. Jason took a month to come to terms with the situation and then relocated to be closer to Michelle. After a few months, they got married, but it wasn't due to love or the pregnancy. Instead, it was because Michelle lacked health insurance, and the cost of childbirth would have been prohibitively expensive. Marriage provided a solution to this financial burden. Their daughter, Cassidy Elizabeth, was born in the spring of 2004. Michelle threw herself into domestic life and family responsibilities, with the help of her mother and younger sister. Although Michelle's family was wary of Jason, they tried to avoid conflicts and accepted him as part of their family. Later that year, the young family moved into a large house in a quiet neighborhood. Michelle's mother, Linda, came to visit to help with housework and noticed a tense atmosphere in the home. Jason had a bad temper and often started arguments. Michelle tried to downplay these incidents and appear cheerful. However, she confirmed with her mother the true state of their relationship, which seemed ominous. When Cassidy was just 2 years old, Michelle found out she was pregnant again. She was nervous about sharing the news with her husband, but he took it calmly and even seemed happy. The family decided to visit Jason's parents in Brevard to share the news in person. They spent the weekend celebrating with relatives, and on Monday they left Cassidy with the grandparents for a few hours and went out to dinner to celebrate the event. As they were driving home, Jason, who was driving, overturned and the car went off the road into a ravine. They were left very frightened with a few scrapes and bruises, but their lives were not in danger. However, Michelle had suffered a miscarriage, so Michelle was very worried. Jason was surprisingly calm about the accident. Before the accident, during a business trip, Jason met an old college friend, Michelle Money. She had the same name as Jason's wife, Michelle. Jason told his wife about it. They decided to invite Michelle Money to visit their home, and she agreed. During her visit, Michelle Money began to complain about her unhappy family life. At the same time, Michelle Money kept complimenting Jason and telling his wife that she was lucky to be pregnant. Michelle was not worried about Michelle Money's behavior, but she genuinely wanted to comfort her friend. Jason and Michelle Money began calling each other every day and secretly meeting each other. Jason always justified his absence with business trips, and his wife could not guess anything. Things got complicated in the summer of 2006, when Michelle found out she was pregnant. Unlike her previous pregnancies, Jason's reaction was unhappy and cold. Michelle attributed his sadness to her previous miscarriage, still not knowing the real reason for his cold behavior. In November, with Michelle 5 months pregnant, Jason embarked on a 300-mile business trip. Michelle, who was pregnant, had a lengthy phone conversation with her best friend, discussing family problems and a heated argument she had with her husband the previous night. After the call, her husband left. Jason embarked on a 300-mile business trip. Around 10 p.m., Jason arrived at a hotel, claiming fatigue from his journey. However, instead of resting, he began to carefully examine the hotel's entrances, exits, and security cameras, planning a way to leave and return undetected. He was creating a solid alibi for a crime he intended to commit. Early the next morning, Jason calls Meredith and asks for her help. He tells her that he wants to surprise his wife with a piece of jewelry for their anniversary, but accidentally sent the order confirmation to their home fax machine. Jason is worried that Michelle will see the gift and ruin the surprise. Even though Meredith doesn't like Jason, she agrees to help him. Meredith arrived at her sister's house, using a secret door in the garage that only family members knew about and that was always left unlocked. The house was unusually quiet, but Michelle's keys, wallet, and important papers were still in the hallway, suggesting she hadn't left the premises. When Meredith went upstairs, she found the bedroom door wide open, but neither Michelle nor her daughter responded to her calls. When she entered the room, Meredith was met with a horrific scene. Michelle lay on the floor by the bed, her skull fractured and her body surrounded by a large pool of blood. The walls, furniture, and floor were all stained with blood, and tiny footprints were visible next to the body. Sadly, Michelle had been dead for hours. As Meredith rushed to call 911, she heard a faint noise coming from under the bed. When she looked back, she saw Michelle's young daughter, Cassidy, looking at her with a confused expression. Cassidy was unharmed. The little girl had witnessed her mother's brutal death and had spent many hours by her side. A forensic examination of Michelle's body later revealed a series of bruises, abrasions, and broken bones. Her teeth had been broken, and her skull had been fractured by a heavy object. A bloody pillow was found next to her body, with marks suggesting she had been suffocated by the pillow. The murder investigation revealed some crucial facts. First, nothing was stolen from the house, indicating that the killer's sole intention was to murder the Michelle. Furthermore, there were no signs of forced entry or broken locks, suggesting that the perpetrator had a key or knew about a secret door that only family members were aware of. Normally, Jason would be the prime suspect, but in this case, Jason seemed to have a solid alibi. He claimed to have checked into the hotel and not left until the morning, then attended a business meeting. Hotel records confirmed that he used a key card to enter and exit the room. However, upon closer inspection, investigators discovered several irregularities in Jason's alibi. A hotel employee found the fire escape open and propped up with a rock. When investigators reviewed surveillance footage to determine who had propped up the rock, they discovered that the camera had been deliberately disabled on the night of the murder. Jason's room was last recorded about half an hour after he checked in. The strange events continued. Later that night, a man resembling Jason stopped at a gas station between the hotel and the crime scene. When asked to show identification as required by the station's rules, he refused, paid with cash, and hastily left without waiting for his change. The on-call attendant identified Jason, but he denied any involvement, claiming that he had spent the night in the hotel room. His actions, however, raised suspicion. On the day before the tragedy, Jason had made more than 24 calls to his wife, Michelle, and 5 more to his mistress, Michelle Money, each lasting less than 15 seconds, suggesting he was in a state of panic. Notably, these calls were made. Outside the hotel, contradicting his claim that he had been in the room all night. Additionally, Jason was late for a scheduled business meeting with his partners and appeared distracted. While these incidents were suspicious, they did not prove his guilt, so Jason was able to maintain his normal life for nearly 3 years. He even won custody of his young daughter, which was a huge blow to Michelle's family. Jason's case was reopened in 2012 with new evidence. Witnesses reported seeing his distinctive white car near his home on the night of the murders. A child psychologist testified about Jason's daughter reenacting a disturbing scene with her doll. And Jason's former mistress Michelle Money revealed Jason's mood swings and violent outbursts, and that he had confided in her about his marital woes. This testimony helped convict Jason of brutally assaulting his pregnant wife, and he was sentenced to life in prison without parole. As a result of Jason's actions, his daughter, Cassidy, was left without parents. Her mother was murdered, and her father is in prison for the crime. Cassidy is now being cared for by her aunt and maternal grandparents. Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore, the case of Diana Maria Cayer Lopez Pinal. Diana Maria Cayer Lopez Pinal was born on August 12, 1998, in Madrid, to parents Diana Cristina Lopez Pinal and Juan Carlo Cayer. She has a younger sister named Valeria. Her family was wealthy and everyone in the family was very close-knit. But their lives hit a snag in 2013 when Diana's parents divorced. However, the father still visits his daughter regularly on holidays. In the summer of 2016, Diana, her mother, and her younger sister spent their vacation in the small coastal town of Apab du Carmel, a place they had visited many times before. The town, with a population of around 10,000, is a quiet and picturesque retreat away from the hustle and bustle of city life. On the evening of August 21st, Diana told her mother that she was going to meet her friends at Val Inclin Park to celebrate the Feast of the Virgin Carmen. The park was close to their vacation cottage, and Diana often walked there. Her mother gave her permission to go. Diana spent a fun evening with her friends, she unaware that it would be the last time they would see each other. At around 2:30 a.m., she said goodbye to her friends and began her home. On the way, she ran into a friend, Paso de Ariel, near her favorite pizzeria. He was the last person to see Diana that night. The next morning, August 22, 2016, became a nightmare for Diana's mother, Cristina. When she realized her daughter hadn't come home from the party, she grew concerned. Diana's phone was off, which only added to her worry. Without hesitation, Cristina contacted the police and reported her daughter missing. According to Cristina, Diana didn't have any serious emotional or mental health issues, despite her parents' divorce when she was younger. Police opened an investigation into Diana's disappearance, looking into the mysterious circumstances surrounding her disappearance. Diana's disappearance is a mystery that investigators must unravel. Their first clue came from the last message she sent to a friend in Madrid via WhatsApp. In these messages, Diana mentioned a stranger who was stalking her and shouting strange phrases, causing her to feel scared. Unfortunately, these were her last messages, after which she stopped replying to her friends' messages. During their search, they found a black hair band along the road that resembled the one Diana was wearing that night. Although this was the only evidence found at the scene of her disappearance, it gave investigators a clue to work with. Diana's friends had no information about her disappearance. Additionally, there were no CCTV cameras in the area where she was last seen. The street was dimly lit and deserted, with only a few garages and an old nightclub. Although some people reported seeing Diana get out of a car with 3 men and then get into another car, but these were not corroborated. The investigation into Diana's disappearance considered 2 primary theories. One possibility was that she was kidnapped by someone she knew. The other theory is that she was the victim of a random attack by a mentally unstable individual. Diana's mother proposed a third theory, speculating that her daughter might have been taken away by boat. New information emerged when Diana's friend and ex-boyfriend revealed that she had met a man from Morocco and purchased hashish with him. However, this detail only added to the complexity of the case. The media reported that the clothes Diana wore on the evening of her disappearance had been found, but her mother disputed it, saying it was not true. Several factors suggest that Diana did not leave voluntarily. Her credit cards and identification were still in the house. It suggests Diana's disappearance was forced, but the case remains unsolved and remains a mystery. After Diana vanished, the media reported on a fight between Diana and her mother that had occurred just days before. The press claimed that Diana had a nervous breakdown and needed medical attention. Her sister Valeria was also hospitalized with similar symptoms. To avoid conflict, the court awarded custody of Valeria to her father. The decision was made as a precaution due to the stress of Diana's disappearance. The father and Valeria left town, sparking rumors that the family was hiding something. Diana's friends revealed that running away from home was not unusual for her sisters, especially 16 years old, Valeria. The family dynamics were complex, and arguments between the mother and daughters were common. This information raises a question: if Diana regularly left the house without any problems, why was her mother so worried this time? On August 31st, Diana's parents failed to appear for a press conference, where they were expected to provide an update on the investigation into their daughter's disappearance. According to the family's lawyer, her parents were too distraught to attend, as they were struggling to accept the possibility of never seeing Diana again. An article published in El Mundo on September 11th revealed new information about the family's situation. Contrary to the mother's claims that Diana did not have mental health issues, it was reported that Diana had previously gone missing for 3 days in April. During this time, she had turned off her phone and told her mother that she no longer wanted to live with her. The mother had not contacted the police, which raised concerns about her response to her daughter's behavior. Letters exchanged between Diana and her younger sister Valeria were also made public, shedding light on the emotional struggles both girls were facing. Valeria had been hospitalized multiple times in the past year, including one instance where she had to have her stomach pumped due to an overdose of prescription medication. Prosecutors have launched a new investigation into the alleged abuse of Valeria, the youngest daughter of the family, due to the lack of progress in the case of Diana's disappearance. The investigation into Diana's disappearance is currently in progress and is moving forward quickly. Forensic experts have analyzed several items belonging to Diana, including her toothbrush, comb, computer, diary, and prescription medication. Investigators have also questioned her acquaintances, including a young Moroccan man she had a brief relationship with. Unfortunately, these efforts yielded no results and police searches remained unsuccessful. The police have conducted extensive searches in the surrounding mountains, forests, rivers, and lakes. However, it appears that Diana disappeared at around 3 a.m., and the last signal from her phone was detected in the Tarragon area, 13 miles from her family's location. 72 days after her disappearance, Diana's case remains unresolved. However, police have found a hairband and a cell phone matching the description of Diana's phone. Her father has confirmed that the phone belongs to his daughter. 2 months after Diana went missing, her Facebook profile suddenly became active again. Her friends and family quickly informed the police and provided screenshots. It appeared that the Remind Password feature had been used, allowing someone to access her account without knowing her login details. This led to 2 possible explanations: either Diana had forgotten her password and was trying to regain access, or someone else was attempting to break into her account. Diana's phone was a key element in the case, but it did not provide any useful information that could help explain her disappearance. The investigation finally made progress on November 10, 2006, when the driver of the car in which Diana was last seen was identified. The driver had a history of being involved in human trafficking, but this information was kept confidential to avoid jeopardizing the investigation. Initially, he had an alibi for the night of Diana's disappearance, as his wife claimed he was with her, which temporarily cleared him as a suspect. On December 25, 2017, a new piece of information came to light that greatly helped the investigation. A girl was attacked by a man who demanded her phone and threatened her with a weapon. She screamed, and a passing couple intervened, saving her from the assailant who attempted to drag her into his car. The traumatized girl quickly contacted the police, providing a description of the attacker and his vehicle's license plate number. The next day, the police arrested 41-year-old Jose Enrique Abuengay, who had a previous criminal record. Significantly, Jose Enrique was the same individual who had been detained in 2016 on suspicion of kidnapping Diana but was released due to an alibi provided by his wife. Police re-questioned Jose Enrique and his wife. Following the interrogation, the wife admitted that her initial alibi had been false, and in reality, Jose Enrique was away from their home on the night Diana disappeared and did not return until 4 a.m. Jose Enrique initially claimed that he had accidentally hit Diana with his car and, fearing discovery and imprisonment, he had dumped her body. However, he later changed his story, confessing to kidnapping and murdering her. According to Jose Enrique's new testimony, he went to the beach to look for gasoline from abandoned cars, and that's where he met Diana. The confession of Jose Enrique reveals shocking and disturbing information. He kidnapped Diana, attempted to force her into a sexual act, and ultimately strangled her. This shocking confession sheds light on the case, confirming that Diana's disappearance was a heinous crime. The disappearance of Diana Maria Cayer Lopez Pinal has been a traumatic and lengthy case for her family and those following her case. The investigation lasted 494 days, and was heavily covered by the media, with many unfounded and damaging rumors about her parents, causing them great distress and making the investigation more difficult. Despite these challenges, investigators persisted and eventually gathered enough evidence to identify the perpetrator. Diana's loved ones remember her as a beautiful, energetic young woman whose short life was unfortunately ended after an encounter with a violent man. Although Jose Enrique initially withheld information about Diana's whereabouts, he eventually revealed the location of her body, allowing her family and friends to hold a proper burial in January 2018. Her body was discovered in the well of an abandoned warehouse. The perpetrator, Jose Enrique, was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after serving 35 years. Hi everyone, thanks for returning. Let's unravel another perplexing mystery, the case of Mitzi Sanchez. Mitzi Sanchez was born on August 10, 1992, in Vallejo, California. She grew up in a large, with 2 brothers and a sister. As a child, Mitzi was cheerful and bright, enjoying time outdoors with friends and playing with her siblings. From a young age, she demonstrated independence, often walking to elementary school with her brother without adult supervision, as the school was nearby. On August 10, 2000, Mitzi's 8th birthday, she was excited about the celebration party her family had planned. However, when she asked her mom if she could skip school, the request was denied. Upset, Mitzi left her home with her brother at around 7:30 a.m. The plan was for her to wait for her brother after classes, and they would walk home together. But when her brother went outside the school, he couldn't find Mitzi. Assuming she had already left without him, he headed home alone. However, when he arrived home, Mitzi had disappeared without a trace. Mitzi's older sister grew concerned when she realized Mitzi was missing, especially since her birthday party was supposed to take place that day. As her absence seemed unusual, the sister called their mother around 4 p.m. to report the situation. The mother immediately contacted Mitzi's school and confirmed that Mitzi had attended all her classes that day. However, when the mother reached out to family members and Mitzi's friends, no one had seen her after school. Mitzi's family became worried and started looking for her. Family, friends, and neighbors mounted a massive search operation. Some walked the streets, while others went door to door along the route from her home to school, asking locals if they had seen her. They also distributed flyers with information about Mitzi. Despite their extensive efforts, they were unable to find her, leading Mitzi's parents to call 911 for assistance. The police quickly joined the search and local media started covering the case. The news of Mitzi's disappearance spread quickly, not just in local news outlets but also across the state. Mitzi's family has given several interviews to raise awareness of her disappearance. Her mother desperately pleaded with them to return her daughter safely. The police received a lot of information, but none of it was useful. 24 hours after Mitzi went missing, the investigation had new clues. A man contacted the police to report finding bloody rags at a landfill. After further examination, experts discovered that the rags were actually bed sheets from a hotel in Vallejo. The evidence was sent to the lab for analysis, but it would take several days to obtain the results. Investigators also went to the hotel, but they were unable to confirm whether Mitzi was there. As the investigators waited for the lab results, they thoroughly searched the landfill for any additional clues, but they found nothing. However, the next day, August 12th, the police received a call that changed the course of the investigation. At around 11 a.m., a man called the police to report a disturbing incident. While driving through an industrial area in Santa Clara, he saw a little girl running towards his van, screaming that someone was chasing her. The girl quickly got into the van, and the driver saw a man running in their direction. A young girl escaped from her kidnapper and sought help from a van driver. As soon as she got into the truck, the kidnapper quickly fled the scene. The girl, who identified herself as Mitzi Sanchez, told the driver what had happened, and he immediately contacted the police. The officers quickly took Mitzi to a hospital for a medical examination. They also arranged for her to speak with her mother over the phone, and soon her relatives arrived at the hospital, where they were reunited with Mitzi. The van driver proved to be a valuable witness in the investigation. He was able to provide the police with the license plate number of the kidnapper's vehicle, which he had seen as it sped away. The truck driver happened to be on the road that day, which was lucky. If he hadn't been there, the kidnapper might have caught up with Mitzi. The police checked the license plate and discovered that the car belonged to 39-year-old Curtis Dean Anderson, a man with a history of crime. He had previous convictions for theft and kidnapping, and was also suspected of other offenses. Police took a statement from Mitzi about what happened to her. Mitzi recounted that on August 10th, she was excited to finish school and head home to celebrate her birthday with her family. When her last class ended, she decided not to wait for her brother and walked home alone. As she walked, she noticed a car parked by the side of the road about a few hundred yards away. Inside, a man was watching her through the rearview mirror. The girl felt uncomfortable, but she was not worried because it was daytime and she was walking on a familiar street. In addition, because she was young, she was not aware of the potential risks posed by strangers. Mitzi was approached by a man who got out of his car and asked for her help. He claimed to have a leg injury from an accident and needed assistance in retrieving a roll of tape from under the car seat. Despite feeling uneasy, Mitzi agreed to help, as her parents had taught her to assist others in need. However, as soon as Mitzi reached for the tape, the man's intentions became clear. He pushed her into the car, covered her mouth, and slammed the door shut. Mitzi tried to scream, but it was too late. The man drove away, Mitzi to watch in horror as they passed by her home, where her family was preparing to celebrate her birthday. The man eventually stopped in a deserted parking lot, where he gave Mitzi new clothes and forced her to change. He then threw away her old clothes in a nearby trash bin. He warned Mitzi not to try to escape, claiming he had a gun and that no one had ever managed to escape from him. For the next few hours, Mitzi was driven to an unknown location. Mitzi demanded to know why she had been kidnapped. But the man's response was that he had gone through a similar experience as a child. When night fell, he stopped the car again and began covering the windows with rags to conceal their location. He then shackled Mitzi's leg with a chain and padlock. The man pulled out a bottle of alcohol and insisted that Mitzi drink some. Despite her initial reluctance, she eventually gave in. He took pictures of her using a camera. The perpetrator then lay down in the car to sleep. Fearing that she would be at his mercy if she fell asleep, Mitzi stayed awake and began thinking of an escape plan. Her chance came when she saw a police car driving past the parking lot. However, it was too far away, and she realized that even if she screamed, the officers would not be able to hear her. The next day, the perpetrator continued to drive Mitzi around the city, forcing her to sit on the floor of the car and covering her with sheets to conceal her from view. At one point, he briefly stepped out of the vehicle, giving Mitzi an opportunity to try and escape. She attempted to free her leg from the chain but quickly realized it was impossible. She also found a nail file and tried to use it to unlock the padlock, but unfortunately, it didn't work. When the perpetrator returned to the car and drove away, he made a disturbing claim: he had stopped by Mitzi's parents' house. Under the guise of a good citizen, he asked for flyers to distribute around town, further manipulating the situation. Mitzi was left feeling shocked and overwhelmed, knowing she had been so close to home yet still remained in captivity. Over the next few hours, the perpetrator repeatedly stopped the car, getting in and out. Eventually, he drove to a remote area outside of town and parked. There, he committed a sexual assault against Mitzi, leaving her in a state of shock. Afterward, the perpetrator fell asleep. The next morning, he resumed driving, making several stops to buy cigarettes and alcohol. When he returned to the car and leaned into the cabin, an object fell out of his pocket. He warned Mitzi not to look, but she disobeyed. She glanced down and saw a large set of keys. Mitzi quickly realized that one of the keys could open the lock on her chain. Although afraid of the perpetrator's possible reaction, Mitzi was brave enough to act. She grabbed the keys, selected one that seemed to fit the lock best, and tried to unlock it. To her relief, the key worked. Mitzi managed to free herself from the chain and moved towards the car door, which was the last barrier between her and freedom. To escape, she opened the window and tried to climb out. However, her body was exhausted, and her legs had almost no strength left. Using the last of my strength, she pushed herself upwards and finally jumped out of the car. As she moved around it, she spotted her kidnapper, who instantly saw her as well. He yelled for her to come back, but Mitzi had no intention of surrendering. She took off in the opposite direction, and her kidnapper started chasing after her. As she fled, she attempted to get help from passing cars by waving her hands and screaming, but all the cars ignored her pleas and kept driving by. Not losing hope, Mitzi kept running forward. In her desperate situation, every moment seemed like an eternity. Mitzi is driven by the fear that if she stops even for a moment, she will be captured by the perpetrator, a fate she is determined to avoid. Finally, she spotted a van and she ran towards it, jumping in front of it to stop the driver. The driver quickly halted, and Mitzi climbed into the cabin, exhausted, dehydrated, and starving, but safe. At the hospital, she received the medical attention she needed, and her family soon arrived to be reunited with her. Mitzi's story quickly became top news in town. When she returned home, thousands of people gathered on her street, cheering and shouting birthday wishes she had missed while in captivity. Meanwhile, the police were searching for her kidnapper, whose location remained unknown. During the investigation, the police showed Mitzi's mother a photo of the suspect, and she recognized him. She had seen him twice before, once before Mitzi's abduction, when he was standing on their street, staring at their house, and again the day after Mitzi's disappearance, when he came to their home asking for flyers. Police eventually arrested the suspect, Curtis. He confessed to Mitzi that she was not his first victim and that no one had ever managed to escape him before. Curtis's careful planning and execution suggested he had experience with similar crimes. It is notable that Curtis had a prior conviction for kidnapping a woman in 1991, for which he served time until his release in November 1999. The trial began in April of the same year. Mitzi bravely testified in a crowded courtroom, recounting every detail of Curtis's crimes against her. Even though Curtis was there, Mitzi remained calm and completed his mission. As a result, Curtis received a 251-year prison sentence. However, this marked the beginning of a new chapter in the investigation. Detectives regularly visited Curtis in jail, questioning him about potential involvement in other crimes. One of these visits, they discovered that Curtis had confessed to a fellow inmate about kidnapping and murdering 8 additional girls. The inmate agreed to cooperate with the police, sharing Curtis's confession in detail. However, Curtis himself was reluctant to reveal all his secrets. Instead of denying the allegations, he attempted to negotiate privileges in exchange for information, speaking with detectives in riddles. As for Mitzi, she was constantly bullied and ridiculed by her classmates, labeling her the kidnapped girl. They even told her she should have died instead of being rescued. The constant bullying made her school years extremely difficult, which hindered her recovery from the traumatic experience. Mitzi could no longer handle the immense pressure. As a result, she turned to alcohol as a means of coping with stress, relying more and more on it. Eventually, she lost hope of returning to a normal life. However, a car accident after a party with friends changes her life forever. Mitzi suffered serious injuries, including a broken neck and arm, and spent 2 weeks in a coma. Upon waking up, she received news from her doctors. She was pregnant with a daughter. This gave Mitzi the power to change her life for the better. She decided to devote herself entirely to her daughter and also to helping other children who were victims of various crimes. Mitzi went on to found a non-profit organization that continues to help those in need to this day. As for Curtis, he passed away in 2007 due to illness, just 6 years after being sentenced. The detectives' only regret was that they were unable to obtain full confessions from him regarding other cases he was suspected of being involved in. Notably, his son followed a similar path and was also convicted of murder. Unfortunately, the son's life was cut short in prison in 2019. Hi everyone, thanks for returning. Let's unravel another perplexing mystery. The case of Jessica Dishon. Jessica Dishon was born on May 2, 1982, in the small town of Shepherdsville, Kentucky. As the eldest of 3 children, Jessica took on significant responsibilities from a young age, helping her parents care for her 2 younger brothers while they worked. At age 15, Jessica started working part-time at a restaurant to save money to buy her first car, a red Pontiac. A few years later, she bought the car she wanted. Despite her job, Jessica excelled in school and began planning to attend college, where she hoped to study accounting. In the fall of 1999, 17-year-old Jessica was about to start her senior year of high school. She had also started dating a boy, which made her very happy. On the morning of Friday, September 10th, Jessica's parents went to work, and her younger brothers caught the bus to school. However, Jessica did not leave for school as planned. Later that day, around noon, Jessica's mother returned home from work and noticed something unusual. Jessica's car was still parked in front of the house. The mother went to Jessica's room, thinking that maybe she had overslept and missed school. But Jessica was not in her bedroom. The mother then considered the possibility that Jessica might have gotten a ride to school from her father, so she called him to ask. However, he told her that he had gone to work alone that morning. Jessica's mother suspected something was wrong with her car, so she took out a spare key to try to start the car. When she approached the car, the driver's door was slightly open, and Jessica's cell phone was lying on the seat with the numbers 9 and 1 displayed on the screen, indicating that she had tried to call 911. Jessica's shoes and keys were found under the front seat, while her textbooks, work clothes, and purse were in the back seat. Jessica's mother was worried about Jessica's safety. It was obvious that she had tried to call for help but was unsuccessful. Furthermore, Jessica could not leave her belongings in the car and leave. Jessica's parents contacted her school, learning that Jessica had not come to class that day. When Jessica's best friend at work called her parents a few hours later, saying that Jessica had not come to work, they became even more worried about Jessica. Jessica's parents immediately contacted the police, but the sheriff downplayed the situation, suggesting that Jessica might have wandered off and would return home on her own. Despite Jessica's parents' pleas, the sheriff refused to open an investigation. Undeterred, Jessica's parents contacted relatives, friends, and acquaintances, but no one had any information about Jessica's whereabouts. They then searched the entire town, scouring the area, but there was no sign of her. The next morning, Jessica's parents returned to the sheriff's office to report that she had not returned home. The sheriff sent 2 officers to check Jessica's car. However, the officers searched the car without wearing gloves, potentially destroying evidence. Furthermore, the officers did not search Jessica's room. Feeling frustrated with the police, Jessica's parents sought the help of the local media, hoping to draw attention to Jessica's disappearance and the police's lack of attention. Jessica's family and friends, led by her father and Uncle Stanley, launched a search for Jessica. They also distributed flyers with information about Jessica. Fearing the worst, they focused their search on an area near a river, which was known to be a crime hub. For hours, Jessica's family members thoroughly searched the challenging terrain near the river but couldn't find any sign of Jessica. The next morning, Jessica's parents were at home, and their son was playing in the yard. Suddenly, he rushed inside, saying he had heard a faint cry for help that sounded exactly like his sister's voice. Jessica's father immediately grabbed his gun and ran outside to find the source of the screams. At the same time, his brother arrived and joined the search. They quickly noticed smoke coming from the property of their neighbor, 40-year-old David Brooks. As they approached, they saw Brooks undressing on his property. Jessica's father asked Brooks for permission to search his farm, but Brooks refused and told them to leave. This was not the only unusual behavior Brooks displayed. Before Jessica's disappearance, the 2 families had a normal relationship. However, soon after, he would drive slowly past their house, staring at them with an ominous smile. After seeing Brooks burning clothes on their property, Jessica's parents went back to the police, shared their concerns and asked them to come and meet Brooks with the dogs. The police agreed. The dogs were given some of Jessica's clothes to track her scent. They led the police to Brooks's fire pit, but no significant evidence was found. However, the dogs did find black gloves in one of Brooks's sheds that smelled like decomposition. During the search, no concrete evidence was found. Frustrated with the police, Jessica's father contacted the FBI for help. The FBI usually does not get involved in missing persons cases based on the family's request, but this time they decided to investigate immediately. After Jessica's parents presented the case and the family's findings, the FBI opened a full-scale investigation. The FBI proceeded to collect fingerprints from Jessica's room and her car, confiscating all potential evidence for further analysis. Additionally, investigators conducted a comprehensive search of the area using helicopters and volunteers. They thoroughly examined the pond near Jessica's home. The FBI searched Brooks' farm and found a printed photo of Jessica. This discovery led the FBI to strongly suspect Brooks' involvement in her disappearance. They also suspected his 35-year-old brother, Joseph, although despite a thorough search, the FBI found no evidence. Due to lack of incriminating evidence, the investigation focused on searching the surrounding area. 17 days after Jessica went missing, police received a call on September 27th. A woman was driving along a road near the river. Noticing something unusual near a tree, the woman stopped to check and was horrified to see a body. She called the police immediately. When FBI agents arrived, they discovered the body of a young woman who had suffered severe trauma. She was missing several fingers and toes. A rope tied around her legs showed traces of red and silver paint. Additionally, some of her clothing was missing, suggesting that she may have been sexually assaulted, leading the FBI to develop disturbing theories about the murder. Medical experts later confirmed the identity and determined that Jessica had been strangled. Her body also showed extensive bruising. Her limbs and fingers had been separated after death, suggesting that she was still alive when this happened. However, the most disturbing fact was that Jessica had survived for approximately 3 days after she went missing. This meant that the police had the opportunity to rescue her. But unfortunately, they did not take any action to do so. After the body was discovered, the FBI re-interviewed Brooks, who changed his story. He initially said he had seen Jessica near her home, but later said he had not seen her. His alibi was disputed by his wife, and he failed a polygraph test, prompting the FBI to arrest him and proceed to trial. The FBI said the likelihood of a conviction was low due to a lack of concrete evidence. While they had some troubling clues that pointed to his involvement, they were circumstantial and inconclusive. As the trial progressed, detectives continued to search for additional evidence. During a re-examination of Brooks' car, they found a rope similar to the one used to tie Jessica up. However, analysis showed no DNA on the rope. Brooks' trial began in January 2003. His attorney maintained his innocence, citing a lack of evidence. During the trial, it was revealed that investigators had found the victim's missing limbs but had not properly preserved them, causing them to decompose and lose potential evidence. The remaining circumstantial evidence was insufficient to convict, and the jury was unable to reach a unanimous decision, resulting in Brooks' acquittal. Under state law, he could only be brought back if new evidence was discovered. Jessica's parents were devastated by the outcome. The parents also felt that if the police had done their job properly, Jessica might still be alive. Over time, the case went cold and was largely abandoned, leaving the family without closure. In 2012, a new detective, Lynn Hunt, joined the local police department and was tasked with reviewing unsolved cases. Lynn Hunt began by examining the murder case of Jessica. However, she was shocked to find that the original investigation was poorly handled, with case files containing errors and lacking key information from interviews with relevant parties. The evidence was also not properly documented, forcing Lynn Hunt to start the investigation from scratch 13 years after the crime. Hunt met with Jessica's family and obtained a box of her belongings that had been kept in her car at the time of the murder. One of her brothers, now an adult, had kept the box since the police returned the items to the family. Lynn Hunt was again disappointed by the careless handling of the evidence, as it had not been stored according to protocol. Her efforts paid off when she discovered a crucial document, Brooks' medical examination report, which revealed that Brooks had an IQ of 61, which is considered low. With a low IQ, Brooks may not have fully understood the questions and may have given incomplete answers. All of this led Lynn Hunt to think that this man might not have anything to do with the case. Lynn Hunt began to consider other suspects. Lynn Hunt conducted an extensive review of everyone connected to the case and those living in the surrounding area. This investigation continued until September 2014, nearly 15 years after Jessica's death. A coworker contacted Lynn Hunt with information about an inmate at the Kentucky State Prison who claimed to know who killed Jessica. Lynn Hunt initially dismissed the information as unreliable. Many inmates make up stories to get released early. However, Lynn Hunt verified the information before dismissing it. Lynn Hunt visited the prison and met a man who told her that he had previously shared a cell with another inmate. During conversations, the inmate revealed to him that he was responsible for the murder of Jessica Dishon. The informant revealed that Stanley Dishon, Jessica Dishon's uncle, had a dark secret. According to the informant, Stanley confessed to years of sexual abuse of Jessica while they lived under the same roof. He warned her that if she spoke about the abuse, he would kill her or someone she cared about. When Jessica started dating in the spring of 1999, Stanley became increasingly fearful that she might confide in her boyfriend about the abuse she had suffered at his hands. On September 10th, Stanley visited Jessica at her home when she was alone, and he saw her packing her belongings into her car. He approached her and asked her to end her relationship with her boyfriend. However, Jessica refused, threatening to expose Stanley's actions if he did not leave her alone. As Stanley threatened her, causing Jessica to reach for the phone to call 911. Stanley tried to grab her, but she broke free and ran back to her room. Stanley followed her into her room, striking her before binding her with her own sheets. Stanley then dragged her to an abandoned shed not far from where her body would later be discovered. Stanley held Jessica captive for several days, subjecting her to abuse and torture before ultimately killing her. Stanley then placed her body in a visible location near the road and buried the bloody sheets under the shed. Additionally, Stanley removed some of Jessica's limbs in an attempt to mislead the police, making it seem like the murder was the work of drug traffickers. Lynn Hunt was intrigued to discover that this crucial detail about the missing limbs had never been made public. Only Jessica's closest relatives were aware that her body had been mutilated, which meant the informant couldn't have fabricated this information. Furthermore, Stanley claimed to have buried Jessica's shoe under a broken tree near the shed. Determined to verify the informant's story, Lynn Hunt decided to search for buried evidence. With limited resources at the local police department, she enlisted the help of Jessica's brother and other relatives, keeping Stanley's possible guilt a secret. She did not report her suspected evidence to them. On the first day of the search, no clues were found despite searching the areas described by the informant. The next day, Jessica's brother and Lynn Hunt returned to the scene. On the way, they noticed an abandoned barn on the side of the road and decided to search. Inside the barn, they began digging. Their search uncovered a buried bed sheet. Lynn Hunt collected the evidence and rushed to Jessica's home. Since her disappearance, her parents had left her room unchanged, which helped in verifying the evidence. Upon comparison, Lynn Hunt confirmed that the bed sheet was indeed from Jessica's bedding, as it matched the pattern of the other linens and was missing from her bed. Following this discovery, Stanley was arrested and questioned by police. Although he appeared visibly shaken during questioning, he refused to confess to the crime. Stanley was eventually charged with murder and the case went to trial. This news shocked Jessica's father. The murderer he had been searching for was none other than his own brother Stanley Dishon. As the trial progressed, Lynn Hunt dug into Stanley's past to gather more evidence. She knew that he had assaulted Jessica, but her investigation uncovered that several of Stanley's female relatives had come forward to report that he had sexually abused them as children. Stanley would approach his relatives, claiming he was temporarily homeless, and asked to stay at their home. However, when left alone with the young girls in their homes, Stanley would sexually assault them, threatening them to ensure their silence. Based on multiple similar accounts, police deduced that Stanley had been engaging in this behavior for approximately 3 decades. Lynn Hunt knew full well that a conviction for murder would be difficult, given the lack of direct evidence, such as fingerprints or DNA, linking Stanley to the crime. Undeterred, Lynn Hunt continued her investigation and stumbled upon a box of old case files that had not been examined before. As she sifted through the boxes, Lynn Hunt was once again frustrated with the police who had originally handled the case. She noticed a letter dated June 26, 2002. A concerned person had written to the police at the time, recounting a story identical to one Lynn Hunt later heard from an inmate at the Kentucky Penitentiary. In the summer of 2002, Stanley was serving a sentence for assaulting a minor family member. While in prison, he confided in a fellow inmate about killing his niece, Jessica. Unbeknownst to Stanley, his fellow inmate was a police informant who soon wrote a detailed letter to the police investigating the case, exposing the horrific events surrounding Jessica's death. However, police believed Brooks was the prime suspect at the time, causing them to ignore other potential leads. This inaction left Lynn Hunt deeply frustrated, becoming frustrated with the lack of professionalism of his colleagues. If the police had done their job properly, this case could have been solved in 2002. After all these years, Lynn Hunt could only hope that Stanley would finally face justice for his actions at the upcoming trial. The process began in 2015 when Stanley appeared in court, pleading not guilty. Jessica's parents were furious. The prosecution believed that a guilty verdict on the murder charges would be difficult due to a lack of evidence. There were also assault charges against other female family members. The prosecution would need these family members to testify in court, sharing explicit details about Stanley's actions against them. Given these challenges, the prosecution decided to offer Stanley a plea deal. In exchange for dropping the death penalty, Stanley would have to plead guilty to both the assaults on his relatives and Jessica's murder. Ultimately, Stanley accepted the deal and pleaded guilty. Jessica's parents, who wanted the truth, were unhappy with this arrangement, but Stanley remained silent in accordance with the terms of the plea deal. Stanley was sentenced to 20 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 15 years. Since he was 56 years old at the time of his conviction, he could be released at age 71. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case, the case of Rowan Ford. Rowan Ford was born on April 11, 1998, in San Diego, California. Her parents divorced when she was young, and her mother, Colleen, moved with her to a small town called Stella in Missouri. Later, her mom met a man named David, and they got married. Colleen had several children from a previous marriage, and soon after their wedding, she and David had a daughter together. Altogether, Rowan had 2 sisters and 2 brothers, and they shared a very close bond. She spent a lot of time outdoors, riding her bike around town, enjoying swimming, and indulging in her passion for drawing. She also liked going to Sunday school at the local church, where she always volunteered to help other kids who had some issues with their tasks. In November 2007, when Rowan was 9 years old, she was in the 4th grade at the local elementary school. Her mom worked the night shift at a store, while her stepdad spent most of the day on the farm, which made Rowan often fend for herself, making her very independent. On November 2nd, she stayed home alone as usual. Her mom went to work, and her stepdad hadn't returned from the farm yet. The next morning, around 9 a.m., Colleen came home from her night shift and checked Rowan's room, but her daughter wasn't there. She asked her husband where her daughter was, and he said she had asked him if she could have a sleepover at a friend's house, and he had let her go. He didn't even ask the friend's name because their town was very small, and he wasn't worried about anything happening to her. But Colleen started to worry and decided to check with all of Rowan's friends. Since there were only a few streets in their town, it didn't take long, but none of them had seen her, and she hadn't stayed over at any of their houses, which made her mother even more concerned. Colleen searched the whole town but couldn't find her daughter. She went back home and told her husband that Rowan was nowhere to be found. She asked him to call the police and report her missing, but he reassured her that everything was fine and that she would come home soon. After waiting for several more hours with no sign of Rowan, Colleen took matters into her own hands and dialed 911 herself. The local sheriff immediately organized a search operation. He went to their house to speak with David, and as he was the last person to see Rowan before she disappeared, David said that on that evening, while he was working on the farm with his colleague Christopher, their mutual friend Nathan came by. They all decided to go to David's place to have some drinks and play pool. They stopped by the store, bought some alcohol, and went to David's house, where they spent several hours. Later in the night, Christopher asked Nathan to drive him home to the neighboring town, where his trailer was. They persuaded David to join them to continue the fun. Before leaving the house, he checked on Rowan in her room, seeing that she was asleep. David left with his friends, and they stopped by the store again to grab more alcohol and headed to Christopher's trailer, where they continued drinking for about an hour. After that, David decided to head home and asked Nathan to give him a ride. Nathan agreed but chose to take back roads instead of the main highway. By that time Nathan was quite drunk and didn't want to risk encountering the police. Nathan dropped David off and drove home. David went straight to bed. Soon after, he was awakened by Rowan, who asked if she could sleep over at a friend's house. Without much thought, he agreed and fell back asleep. Police approached this story with some skepticism. What puzzled them most was the fact that a 9-year-old girl decided to go to her friend's house in the middle of the night, and her stepfather let her go without even asking which friend she was talking about. The sheriff considered that David might be hiding something or directly involved in Rowan's disappearance, but he had no evidence to support this theory. Police searched the town and its surroundings until late at night. Local residents immediately joined the search, as they all knew Rowan's family and wanted to help. The population of Stella was only about 150 people, so news of her disappearance spread throughout the county. People were used to being able to let their children play outside without a worry, as nothing ever happened in such a quiet place. But now that Rowan vanished without a trace, and the police were unable to find her for a whole day, the residents of Stella were in a state of panic. The search for Rowan yielded no results on the first day. However, the investigation progressed on November 4th when the police spoke with Christopher in a neighboring town. He corroborated David's account, but revealed that David had not contacted him to inform him of Rowan's disappearance. Christopher stated he had not spoken with Rowan or her friends since that evening. Despite an expanded search with more volunteers, the police failed to find Rowan or any clues about her disappearance. The following day, the FBI joined the investigation while the local police continued searching the town and surrounding areas. As a result of growing skepticism towards David's account, detectives started focusing on a potential abduction. They spoke with all of Rowan's friends and verified that none of them had seen her on the night she went missing. As investigators questioned David, his account raised even more suspicions. David's details were inconsistent and contradictory. He altered the timeline of his whereabouts that night on multiple occasions. Additionally, David speculates that it is possible that Rowan left without his permission, which makes his story even more suspicious. During their investigation, FBI agents found out that David had borrowed his mother's car on the night of Rowan's disappearance, a detail he initially left out when questioned by the police. This new information led the authorities to seize both his mother's car and his own pickup truck for forensic examination. But unfortunately, no evidence was discovered. As part of the investigation, detectives wanted to speak with Christopher and Nathan again, since both had been with David that evening. Christopher was invited to the police station for further questioning, where he recounted the same story as before. He also agreed to take a polygraph test, which showed no signs of dishonesty. After leaving the police station and returning to work, Christopher noticed Sheriff Clark's car and signaled for him to stop. As the sheriff of Whitton, where Christopher lived, Clark had known him since childhood. Sheriff Clark was close friends with Christopher's foster parents and was someone Christopher had always looked up to and sought advice from in times of need. Sheriff Clark met with Christopher to discuss Rowan's disappearance. Although familiar with the case, Clark hadn't been directly involved since the investigation was led by the Stella Department. During their conversation, Clark noticed that Christopher was acting strangely, which led him to suspect that Christopher might be hiding something. Given the gravity of the situation and Rowan's uncertain fate, Clark shared his concerns with the FBI. His call prompted investigators to consider the possibility that Christopher might be withholding crucial information that could link Rowan's stepfather to her disappearance. They wondered if Christopher's actions were directed by Rowan's stepfather to lie, and whether Christopher feared being seen as an accomplice if he told the truth. Sheriff Clark told the FBI agents that he had a close relationship with Christopher and offered to help persuade him to cooperate. That evening, Christopher visited Colleen's house to ask about the search progress. FBI agents also arrived to speak with Colleen again and saw Christopher there. They asked him questions, and he repeated his previous account. However, Christopher then mentioned for the first time that he didn't rule out David's possible involvement in Rowan's disappearance. He expressed his willingness to help uncover the truth, even if it was terrible, and suggested wearing a wire to talk to David and try to get him to confess. The detectives decided against this approach. Instead, they asked Christopher to suggest locations where David might have hidden Rowan's body. Christopher provided several locations, which the police searched the next morning. Meanwhile, FBI agents questioned David again, but he continued to deny any involvement. Detectives searched Christopher's home for leads, but the search yielded no results. Meanwhile, Christopher visited the sheriff's office to discuss his encounter with the FBI with Clark. During their conversation, the sheriff sensed that Christopher was holding back information. After their meeting, Clark reached out to the detectives again, suggesting that Christopher might be withholding crucial information that helped prove David's involvement in the case. The FBI agents asked the sheriff to persuade Christopher to open up, as he had been in regular contact with Clark to discuss the case. It seemed that Christopher wanted to share important details but was hesitant to do so for unknown reasons. The following day, November 7th, the police asked Christopher to return to the station. They requested his permission to search a safe located in David's house, where Christopher had been living temporarily and still had some belongings. Christopher agreed to the search and also allowed the police to search his trailer and car. Additionally, Christopher voluntarily provided a DNA sample and agreed to answer the detectives' questions again. During the questioning, he was asked to confirm David's story, but this time, Christopher revealed that his friend's account was not entirely accurate. The investigators then pressed him to disclose what really happened that evening. Christopher became agitated when the police treated him like a suspect in Rowan's disappearance. He refused to continue the conversation and left the station after warning the detectives that he might hire a lawyer. Later that evening, Christopher met with Sheriff Clark to express his concerns about the detectives' behavior. Clark acknowledged Christopher's right to remain silent but explained that the police were doing everything possible to find Rowan. Christopher stated that he would no longer cooperate with the detectives and would only speak with Clark if he had any further information to share. Clark continued to encourage Christopher to open up, and eventually, Christopher broke down in tears, claiming that he loved Rowan and would never harm her. During his time living with the David family, Christopher formed a close bond with Rowan and the other children. They grew to treat him like one of their own, even affectionately referring to him as Uncle Christopher. Sheriff Clark realized that Christopher was on the verge of revealing crucial information, but just as he was about to open up, a visitor arrived at the police station, briefly distracting Clark and causing Christopher to leave. Sheriff Clark reached out to the FBI, updating them on his conversation with Christopher. Clark explained that Christopher was almost ready to disclose what he knew, but warned that pressuring him too hard could lead to him becoming defensive and seeking the help of a lawyer. Clark recommended giving Christopher time to reflect, and the detectives agreed. The search for Rowan continued the following day but yielded no results. However, a new clue came on November 9th, exactly 1 week after her disappearance. Search teams converged on a remote area near the town of Powell, about 10 miles from Stella, and made a significant discovery in the fields and woods, a large pit in the ground. When authorities searched the area, they found Rowan's body hidden under leaves and debris. She was not wearing any clothing from the waist down except for a pair of stockings. A medical examination revealed signs of strangulation and evidence of a sexual assault. After the discovery, FBI agents reached out to Sheriff Clark, asking him to speak with Christopher again. Hoping Christopher would now be more forthcoming. Sheriff Clark learned that earlier that morning, Christopher had visited the station, looking for him, and told other officers that he needed to speak with Clark urgently. Sheriff Clark then began searching for Christopher, checking all his usual locations, but he was nowhere to be found. This continued until Christopher contacted Sheriff Clark himself, sounding distressed and asking if he was being followed. Christopher explained that after hearing about Rowan's body, he had driven around town to clear his head and noticed a gray car following him. Sheriff Clark assures Christopher that he knows nothing about the surveillance and suggests they meet in person. When they met, Christopher appeared nervous and expressed concerns for his safety. He feared that with Rowan's body found, he might be accused of murder and that someone might seek revenge against him. Clark took Christopher to the police station, and he said that now when the case had been classified as a homicide, it was time for Christopher to reveal everything he knew. However, when Clark asked Christopher to share what David had done to Rowan, Christopher became emotional and hesitant to talk at the station. He explained that there were too many people around and suggested they move to a quieter location. Clark agreed, and they drove to a small bridge a few miles outside of town. Once they arrived, Christopher asked Clark to handcuff him. Clark was surprised but tried to reassure Christopher that it wasn't necessary. Christopher insists that what he is about to say will change everything and that Clark will then have to arrest him. Christopher then began recounting the events of that night. He told Clark that he, Nathan, and David had gone to his trailer to continue drinking. Later, his friends decided it was time to head home. Nathan gave David a ride, and they chose to take back roads to avoid the police. Christopher had shocked Clark that he had intended to sexually assault Rowan. To carry out his plan, Christopher took advantage of the time when his friends were busy taking a detour through the field. He drove straight to David's house via the main highway. Under the cover of darkness, he slipped into Rowan's room, picked her up, and quietly transported her to his vehicle, carefully avoiding detection as she slept. When they reached his trailer, he sexually assaulted Rowan. This was interrupted when Rowan regained consciousness and tried her best to free herself, but to no avail. During the crime, Christopher took precautions to avoid recognition, deliberately choosing to keep the lights off and maintain his silence. He originally planned to return Rowan to her home under the guise of innocence, but under the illumination of a bright moon, Rowan finally laid eyes on Christopher as he transported her from the trailer. He grabbed a rope, resorted to force to resolve his predicament, and took Rowan's life with his bare hands. He frantically thought of ways to cover up his crime. He got in his car and began driving around the county, pondering methods of disposing of the body. He then remembered a large pit near a neighboring town and headed in that direction. When he arrived, he dumped Rowan's body in the hole and attempted to cover it with tree branches. Returning to the trailer, Christopher discovered traces of Rowan's blood on his clothes and mattress. He also realized he needed to dispose of her pants, underwear, and the rope used to kill her. He gathered these items and placed them in a large barrel, intending to burn them. However, he quickly reconsidered, realizing that a large fire would likely attract unwanted attention. Instead, Christopher dragged the barrel into a shed, closed the door, and started the fire inside. This revelation shocked Clark, who had previously suspected David of committing the crime and believed Christopher was withholding information. It was difficult for Clark to accept that a man he had known for nearly 20 years, a man with 3 young children of his own, was capable of such brutality. Although Christopher appears to be a good-natured man, his true nature is much more worrying. After finishing his story, Christopher willingly went to the police station with Clark. Once there, Christopher repeated his confession to the FBI agents and was subsequently arrested for murder. He also gave the authorities permission to search his trailer and car. As he concluded his confession, Christopher expressed regret over his actions and stated that he had cried uncontrollably the following day. The detectives then informed David about Christopher's confession. Given David's suspicious behavior and inconsistent statements, they suspected he might be covering for his friend. However, during interrogation, David revealed a shocking new testimony. David claimed that when he found Rowan missing from her room, he suspected Christopher might have taken her. He took his mother's car and drove to Christopher's trailer. He found Rowan lying on the bed. Christopher leaned towards her. Instead of rescuing Rowan, David joined in and also sexually assaulted her. He then helped Christopher kill her and dispose of her body. David reported that during that traumatic incident, his brain went into shock, and he had no memory of the night for several days. The detectives, surprised by this new information, re-questioned Christopher to verify David's claim. However, Christopher maintained that David was not involved and that incident unfolded as he had initially described. The inconsistencies puzzled the detectives, but Christopher's account still matched incident that had occurred. Medical examination revealed that the victim was strangled with a thin rope, a detail that only the killer would be aware of. A search of the trailer led to the discovery of a barrel containing ashes, and hair similar to Rowan's was found in Christopher's car. Although investigators were still uncertain about the truthfulness of each man's account, both David and Christopher made incriminating statements. As a result, David was also arrested, and the case were sent to court for further proceedings. During the trial, Christopher requested that his statements be excluded from the case, arguing that he was not aware they could be used against him and that the police had violated his rights. However, the judge rejected this request, as all of Christopher's conversations with investigators were voluntary. Christopher also attempted to present mitigating circumstances, citing his difficult childhood as a factor. He had been shuffled between biological and foster parents from a young age, which had a significant impact on him. Despite these efforts, Christopher was unable to avoid punishment. In 2012, 5 years after the murder, Christopher was sentenced to death. He appealed the sentence, but was unsuccessful. In contrast, David's situation was more complex. Although he admitted to assaulting and killing Rowan, his account conflicted with Christopher's statements, creating a significant problem. If the prosecution had charged David with murder, it could have potentially led to Christopher's conviction being overturned, allowing David to avoid accountability as well. However, due to the lack of concrete evidence, such as DNA, in fact, they were still uncertain about David's involvement. Although it was possible that David might have collaborated with Christopher in committing the crime, there was no supporting evidence for this theory. To minimize the risk of overturning Christopher's sentence, the prosecution made the difficult decision to reduce David's charges. As a result, David pleaded guilty to 2 lesser charges: child endangerment and obstruction of justice. David received an 11 years prison sentence, with a minimum of 5 years to be served. This outcome sparked widespread outrage, as many felt that if David was indeed involved in the murder, his punishment was disproportionately lenient. Unfortunately, this sentence is now final, and it is unlikely that David will face retrial for this case. Christopher remains in prison awaiting execution, but it's uncertain whether the death penalty will be carried out due to the often lengthy time between sentencing and execution, which can span decades, meaning he might spend the rest of his life in prison instead. Hi there, investigators. It's time to uncover the truth behind another case. The case of Candy Rogers. Candace Rogers, also known as Candy, was born on July 18, 1949, in Spokane, Washington. She was an only child in her family, and soon after she was born, her parents divorced. Despite this, Candy maintained a close relationship with her father. Her father lived in the same city, so she got to see him frequently. Candy was a bright and cheerful child who loved spending time outdoors with friends, exploring nature, and playing with her dog. She had a strong desire to join the Campfire Girls, a well-known organization that provided girls with opportunities to learn new skills, go on hikes, and form lasting friendships. In 1959, at the age of 9, Candy finally got the chance to join the Campfire Girls, and she was overjoyed. As a member of Campfire Girls, one of her responsibilities was to sell mints door-to-door in her neighborhood. The organization provided her with boxes of sweets to sell. On Friday, March 6th, Candy planned to sell mints after school. After returning home, having dinner, and playing with her dog, she packed 8 boxes of mints and set out around 4 p.m. Candy had a plan to go door-to-door in her neighborhood, offering sweets to her neighbors. To avoid duplicating efforts, she and the other girls in the area had assigned specific streets to visit. However, when Candy failed to return home by 6 p.m. as expected, her mom started to worry. As night began to fall, her mom and grandfather set out to search for her, scouring the neighborhood streets but finding no sign of Candy. Soon, some family friends and neighbors joined the search, but despite their combined efforts, no one could find any trace of Candy. At this point, her mom decided to call the police for assistance. By the time the police arrived, the streets were dark, and something might have happened to Candy. The police began their investigation by questioning the neighbors and soon discovered that Candy had only sold 1 box of mints, suggesting that something might have occurred shortly after she left her house. A resident reported suggesting that something might have occurred shortly after she left her house. A resident reported seeing a girl matching Candy's description on a nearby street around 6:30 p.m. This was unusual, as Candy's mother had already begun searching for her by that time. Candy's grandfather had a strange experience as well, which occurred when he searched for her on the very same street. He narrowly avoided being hit by a speeding green 1953 Ford, which struck the curb. Unfortunately, he couldn't see the license plate number. The police issued a detailed description of the vehicle and initiated a search, but so far they have not been able to locate it. Later, around 9 p.m., several mint boxes were found scattered along the road near a bridge. These boxes belonged to Candy, increasing concerns for her safety. The police focused their search in this area, thoroughly searching both riverbanks and a small wooded area on either side. Despite an all-night search, Candy was not found. By morning, news of her disappearance had spread through local newspapers. And soon the case was being covered by statewide media. In 1959, child disappearances near their homes were unusual because it happened extremely rarely. The townspeople were extremely worried about this. To resolve this alarming situation, police have stepped up search work. They added mounted police, all-terrain vehicles and helicopters and military personnel to thoroughly search the area. In addition, over 1,000 volunteers joined in the massive search from both local areas and nearby cities. It became one of the most extensive search operations at the time. Despite these efforts, they still could not locate Candy. Another incident that added to the trauma of the town was when a search helicopter struck power lines and crashed. As a result, 3 of its crew members died. However, police remained dedicated and relentless, operating 24/7 on this case. With so many investigations open, officers still tried everything. Throughout the case, nearly 750 initial leads turned up. Officers closely inspected every detail. Regrettably, these investigative trails did not help discover any definitive proof about Candy's. 2 weeks after Candy's disappearance, 2 military personnel from a local base went on a hunting trip in the woods west of Spokane. They stumbled upon children's shoes on the ground, which immediately reminded them of Candy's case. Since many military members had been involved in the search, they were familiar with the details of her disappearance. The military personnel reported their discovery to the police, who then showed the shoes to Candy's grandfather for identification. He confirmed that the shoes belonged to his granddaughter. The police quickly launched a search operation in the woods. Within minutes, an officer spotted a foot protruding from the bushes and discovered Candy's body. She was found lying in the underbrush, covered with pine branches. A medical examination revealed the cause of death was strangulation, also found marks on Candy's hands and feet, indicating that she had been bound. Although no ropes were found near the body. Furthermore, the medical experts concluded that Candy had been sexually abused. During the investigation, the police found a green car seat cover near the crime scene. Additionally, a small purple stain was discovered on Candy's clothing, which smelled like grape-flavored chewing gum. However, the police were unable to establish any connection between the stain and the crime. The police searched for any possible clues to find the killer. They examined incoming tips and investigated hundreds of individuals, including neighbors, suspicious characters, and previously convicted criminals. Their attention eventually turned to a 50-year-old man named Alfred Braves. Alfred became a suspect due to unusual circumstances. He took his own life on the same day Candy's body was discovered, in his car, near where the mint boxes were found. He also lived close to Candy's home. When police found Alfred's body, they discovered a rope and woman's hair pins in his car. After searching Alfred's house, police found numerous newspapers about sexual crimes against women and girls. They also learned that several women had accused him of harassment, and his wife suspected him of Candy's murder. However, investigators were unable to find any evidence directly linking Alfred to Candy's murder. Despite their reluctance, detectives had to eliminate him from the suspect list, as they did not have enough evidence to prove his guilt. As a result, they began investigating other suspects. Several months after the murder, the police had compiled an extensive list of suspects, but despite their diligent efforts, the investigation has made no new progress. Later, the investigators turned their attention to a new suspect, a serial killer named Hugh Morse. Hugh was arrested in 1961 for a string of crimes, and 2 factors made him a person of interest in Candy's case. Firstly, he was known for constantly chewing grape-flavored gum, which was similar to a substance found on Candy's clothing. Additionally, Hugh had killed 2 women in Spokane just a few months after Candy's death. Hugh's history of violence was also a concern. His first arrest was for assaulting a woman, but he received no serious consequences, merely being discharged from the army, where he was serving at the time. Hugh committed a string of robberies in Los Angeles, but only served 6 months in jail. After his release, he lured 2 8-year-old girls to a secluded area with the promise of ice cream and then sexually assaulted them. Despite being arrested again, he managed to avoid prison time. A medical commission evaluated him and deemed him a sexual psychopath, leading to his placement in a mental health facility. 2 years later, doctors believed he was cured and released him from the facility. Hugh then moved to Spokane, where he began spying on women through their windows. In November 1959, Hugh broke into the home of a 28-year-old woman, assaulted her, and ultimately killed her. 10 months later, he entered the residence of a 69-year-old woman and repeated the same violent actions. A month after that, he attacked another woman, stabbing her multiple times, but she survived the assault. Hugh continued to travel from city to city, committing numerous crimes, including attacking women and girls with a knife, sexually assaulting them, and killing 2 more victims. His crimes eventually caught the attention of the FBI, and he was added to the list of the country's 10 most wanted criminals. He was eventually captured and sentenced to multiple life terms in prison. While serving his sentence, Hugh attempted to take his own life, but was saved by the prison guards and continued to serve out his sentence. Detectives investigating Candy's case visited him in prison multiple times, but he consistently denied any involvement in the crime. A polygraph test was also administered, which suggested he was telling the truth. However, lie detector test results are not considered reliable because their accuracy is only relative. Despite the lack of evidence, but investigators initially considered Hugh a primary suspect. Due to his background and the fact that he lived in Spokane at the time of the murder. However, he continued to deny any involvement and police were unable to find any evidence to prove his involvement in the crime. The investigation then shifted focus to another suspect, 49-year-old Howard Barnett. He was arrested in February 1960 on suspicion of molesting a minor girl. Before taking his own life in his cell at the Spokane police station, Barnett wrote a cryptic message in his own blood on the wall, stating, "I have a sin before the Lord." Detectives then began investigating Barnett's potential involvement in the crime, but they were once again unable to find any evidence of his guilt. Howard remained a primary suspect in the case due to his proximity to Candy's residence. Despite years of investigation, police continued to follow new leads and examine other potential suspects. A woman eventually came forward claiming to have seen a green car following Candy on the day she disappeared. Police refocused on locating the vehicle, but this lead ultimately yielded no results. It was notable that the woman waited many years to share this information. The case was reopened at various times, but each time investigators reached a dead end. Throughout the investigation, police not only had to pursue new leads but also had to verify the validity of confessions. 13 people gave false confessions to the crime. However, none of them were able to provide specific details that only the actual killer would have known. Instead, they often repeated details previously reported in the media. High-profile cases often exhibit unexpected and surprising behaviors, such as false confessions. In the case of Candy's murder, numerous detectives worked on the case over time, but none were able to solve it. This crime stood out as one of the most prominent and mysterious in the city and state. Before the murder, parents felt safe letting their children play outside, but the case led many to reconsider their views on safety. Years later, in the early 2000s, the case was reopened, and a new detective decided to use modern technologies to re-examine the evidence. Fortunately, the police had carefully collected and preserved the evidence in 1959, including a sample of male semen on Candy's clothing. Despite being stored for decades, experts were able to re-examine the sample, although it extremely challenging due to its age. After a lengthy investigation, experts finally extracted a DNA profile from the evidence and uploaded it to the FBI database. However, a search of the database yielded no matches. Further cross-examination of the profile with numerous suspect samples also proved unsuccessful. For many years, suspicion fell on Hugh Morse, but forensic evidence revealed no link between him and the crime. This lack of progress brought the investigation to a halt once again. Although the police had the killer's DNA, they struggled to identify the perpetrator. In 2021, a new detective reopened the case and decided to employ a new approach: genetic genealogy. This innovative method had already solved numerous cold cases and offered hope for finally resolving the standing mystery surrounding Candy's murder. The detective reached out to multiple labs that specialized in this type of analysis but was met with disappointment once again. To use this method, experts needed the original DNA sample, which was a challenge. Several labs attempted to work with the semen sample, but each concluded that it had degraded too much, making it impossible to extract the necessary information. The detective then consulted the final lab, which led to a long-awaited important discovery. With the help of state-of-the-art tools, the experts were able to successfully analyze the sample and obtain the perpetrator's DNA profile. This profile is then uploaded to a genealogy database to begin searching for the DNA owner's relatives. After a thorough investigation involving thousands of individuals, researchers pinpointed one family as the likely source of the DNA sample. They discovered that the DNA probably belonged to one of 3 brothers, all of whom had passed away. However, the team found that one brother had a daughter, and the police reached out to her for assistance. The daughter was shocked by the possibility that her father might be the killer, but she immediately agreed to help. She provided a DNA sample, proving that she was closely related to the person whose semen was found on Candy's clothing. With this new information, detectives obtained a court order to exhume her father's remains. A DNA profile extracted from the remains revealed a complete match with the DNA found on Candy's clothing, identifying the killer as John Hoff, 62 years after the crime. Hoff had never been a suspect despite hundreds of others being investigated over the years. Detectives investigating Hoff's biography uncovered his involvement in multiple crimes. At the time of Candy's murder, Hoff was 20 years old and lived close to her house, less than a mile away. He was also a soldier in the army, stationed at a nearby base, where Candy's body was found. 2 years after the murder, Hoff attacked another woman, binding and sexually assaulting her before attempting to kill her. However, the woman survived the attack. Following his arrest, Hoff received a 6-month prison sentence and was dishonorably discharged from the army. After his release, Hoff started a family, having 2 sons and 2 daughters, and he living an ordinary life. He changed jobs several times and at one point, suffered a severe chemical burn to his face while working at a food packaging plant, leaving a scar to his face. Hoff's life ended in June 1970, 11 years after Candy's murder, when he took his own life without leaving a note. Further investigation revealed that Candy might have known Hoff, as she was friends with his 10-year-old sister at the time. Years later, Hoff's sister told detectives that she had cried in Hoff's arms after Candy's murder, unaware that he was the one responsible for Candy's death. Candy's parents did not live to see the day when the killer's identity was revealed. Her mother passed away in 2006, and her father had taken his own life in 1963, 4 years after the tragedy. The reason behind his death remains a mystery. There is speculation that he was unable to cope with the loss of his daughter. Despite this, the case was eventually solved, marking one of the longest investigations in history, spanning over 62 years and involving multiple detectives across different generations. At the press conference, where the killer's name was announced, only one officer who had worked on the case in 1959 was present. He expressed gratitude for having lived long enough to learn the truth. Hoff's daughter initially struggled to accept that her father had committed such a horrific crime. However, she eventually came to terms with the fact, referring to her father as a monster who took an innocent life. She expressed regret that he was not held accountable during his lifetime. A chilling coincidence is that Hoff took his own life when his daughter was 9 years old. the same age as Candy was when she was killed.